Good evening, everyone. This is High Point Mayor Jay Wagner calling to order our regular High Point City Council meeting for Tuesday, June 20th. I want to thank everyone who's here and come out for the meeting tonight. All members of council are present at City Hall, but there's Councilman Jefferson. He's walking in the door right now. So all members of council are present and accounted for. We do have a quorum. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight, taking part in local government. And before we begin the meeting, I'd like to ask everyone to rise for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Beginning tonight, I'd like to read a proclamation regarding Parks and Recreation Month. I think Lee Tillery is here. You got to stand up, you can't hide in the back. Yeah. Any other Parks and Rec staff here? You got to stand up too. Okay. Whereas Parks and Recreation programs and events are an integral part of communities throughout this country, including High Point. And whereas High Point's Parks and Recreation programs and events are fundamentally important to improve the health of our citizens and enriching the lives of our youth, families, older adults, and those with mental or physical disabilities. And whereas Parks and Recreation programs help build healthier, more active communities, aiding in the prevention of chronic disease and improving the mental and emotional well-being of the citizens of High Point. And whereas Parks and Recreation programs increase public engagement among citizens, promote volunteerism, and build strong partnerships with other community organizations and service providers. And whereas our abundance of local parks, trails, greenways, and natural recreation areas sustains the ecological beauty of our community and provides numerous places for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. And whereas parks and recreation programs increase a community's economic prosperity through the attraction and retention of businesses, increased property values, expansion of the local tax base, increased tourism, and crime reduction. And whereas the City of High Point recognizes that the High Point Parks and Recreation enhances this community's quality of life by its commitment to providing opportunities through innovative programs, parks, and facilities for present and future generations. Now therefore be it resolved by the Mayor and the High Point City Council, July 2023 is recognized as Park and Recreation Month in the city of High Point, North Carolina. Thank you. You want to come forward and get this?
Are we in a picture too?
Sure. Yeah. You stand in the middle and hold it. Okay, first on our agenda are the Finance Committee items. And for that part of the agenda, I will pass the meeting to Britt Moore, who chairs the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mayor. Our committee did meet on our allotted date last Thursday. All items have been reviewed and were in your package. They all passed unanimously, so this is a consent agenda for which I am recommending approval.
Second. There's a motion and a second for approval of the Finance Committee agenda items. Is there any discussion on any of these items? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Is there anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
That's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Next, I'll recognize Councilmember Williams, who chairs the Community Development Committee.
Thank you, Mayor. First, on recommendation of staff, I'd like to pull item 2023-271, consideration of the resolution of High Point approving conveyance, out of the consent agenda and off of the agenda for today.
Okay,
And
then that's a motion?
that's a motion.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
And secondly, I'd like to pull the item here. I think it's item 2023-196, which is 411 Willis, out of pending and into the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to place item 2023-196 back onto the consent agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
All right, and so finally, I'd like to make a motion. Should I do these individually since we did make those changes, or can I just do a consent?
I think it's still in the consent agenda. I don't think you have to do them
All right.
individually.
So,
We just amended the consent agenda. Just for clarity's sake, if you would state the items that are in part of the consent agenda as part of the motion, I think that would be, maybe wise.
I will. Within the consent agenda is items 2023-268, which is demolition order for 406 cables. And also item 2023-269, which is a demolition order for the dwelling of 1205 Fibbers Place. And finally, the other one is it's 2023-196, which is consideration of ordinance demolition for dwelling 411 Willis Avenue. So what I'd like to ask first, before we call for the vote, is there anyone to speak for or against any of these consent agenda items here? Seeing none, I make the motion to approve the consent agenda as it stands.
Second.
Okay. There's a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda items under Community Development Committee. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all I have.
Okay, we're now moving to Planning and Development. I'll be handling those items. There are 3 items on for public hearing. I want to state before we begin that we'll be limiting the public hearing items or public hearing speaking times to 3 minutes per person. Asking you to respect your neighbors, and I know there's a lot of folks here who want to speak on these items tonight, so let's respect everyone and please limit your discussion to 3 minutes. I plan to strictly enforce that. Also, I know there's a lot of emotion in the room, so, but I'm not going to tolerate any kind of disruption to the meeting. So the only person who should be speaking should be a member of council or whoever's speaking from the lectern, unless council has recognized someone to speak in some other fashion. So we're not going to have any disruptions tonight. If anyone wants to disrupt the meeting, I'm not going to hesitate to have you removed. So let's be good neighbors, and we'll get through our public hearing, and we'll all go home. So with that, I want to call the first item, which is City of High Point Zoning Map Amendment 23-13.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember, members. My name is Herb Shannon, Senior Planner with the City of High Point Planning and Development Department, and I'll be providing you with a summary of the various zoning public hearing items. Your first item, zoning map amendment case 23-13. This is a request as part of the city's ongoing comprehensive zoning map amendment project, where staff is evaluating land throughout the city. And
Hold on one second.
I'm sorry.
Just, the public hearing is open. I just need to say that to keep our clerk happy.
Okay. Okay. Part of our comprehensive zoning map amendment project. We're looking this time at the Burton Run subdivision in the southwest portion of the city, north of the intersection of Burton Avenue and Burton Run Road. This is a single-family development that was constructed between 2004 and 2006. It is fully completed. It's all developed with only single-family detached homes. However, it has a northern half of this subdivision is zone RM16, and the southern half is zone RM26. Those are multifamily zoning districts that will allow multifamily developments between 16 and 26 units per acre. Staff has concerns with maintaining the character of this existing single-family neighborhood. Primarily, someone can go and buy a house, tear it down, and build a multifamily use on one or two lots in the middle of the neighborhood without any public hearings because the zoning permits it. So staff is recommending rezoning of the Burton Run subdivision from the RM16 and RM26 district to the R5 district to preserve the single-family character of this neighborhood. The Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed this request at their May public hearing and recommended approval by a vote of 7-0. And they have forwarded to you their consistency statement for consistency and reasonableness for your consideration. That is a brief overview. Any questions of staff at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. In this case, the city is the applicant, so we don't need to hear from the applicant. Is there anyone here to speak either in favor or against this item? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing for this item, and I will make a motion to approve this item and state that it is consistent with the city's adopted plans and reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons stated by the Planning and Zoning Board in the staff report. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And that motion passes unanimously. All right, next item is Stack Family LLC of Ronald Purdue, annexation case 2302, and the accompanying zoning map amendment 2312.
Yes, these next two items are related. You have a annexation petition submitted by Ronald Purdue and Stack Family LLC, and a separate zoning map amendment submitted by Guilford County
Public
Schools.
hearing is open.
Oh, sorry about that. These are related applications, but we're going to do a combined presentation, but the council would have to vote on them separately. Regarding the annexation, this property is situated in the northwestern portion of the city's planning area. They're requesting annexation to have access to city utilities. I would note for the members of the public, this annexation petition only pertains to this 27-acre tract of land. It does not pertain to any other parcels in this area. The city's planning area or annexation agreement boundaries extend northward up to I-40. This slide, the area highlighted in yellow notes our annexation area. Since the early 2000s, this northern portion of the city's planning area has had this, this configuration, and that annexation boundary was based upon agreements that staff has negotiated with the city of Greensboro and the town of Kernersville, and those are in place until the early 2030s. I would note, since the early 2000s, this northern portion of the city's planning area has had steady growth with multiple annexation requests. The most recent annexation in this area has been for the 350 South or North High Point Industrial Park, which is about over 500 acres. That lies about 3/4 of a mile to the east and a half mile to the north of this site. And the Northborough subdivision that was annexed in 2020, that's about 1,500 feet to the southeast of this site, and that was approved for a residential development. This annexation petition represents a logical progression of the city's annexation policies for this area, as the site is within the city's established planning area and city utilities have been provided for this area. I would note As part of the evaluation of the annexation, requests were sent to all the department heads to make sure there are no issues regarding service delivery, and there were no objections noted. And with the construction of that Northborough subdivision, city service vehicles are already established in this general area. Thus, staff has no objections to this request, and it will not negatively impact the city's ability to provide city services. In regards to the zoning petition, anytime property is proposed to be annexed into the city zoning must be established, so there's also a zoning application. The zoning is a request to establish a conditional zoning, institutional zoning, or CZI district on this parcel. This is a slide showing lands that have been annexed into the city. All those areas in white are already within the city of High Point. The applicant desires to develop a school on this site with a capacity up to 900 students. Thus, they've requested that institutional zoning. To mitigate potential impacts, they've included in their application a conditional zoning ordinance. We have conditions pertaining to prohibited uses, vehicle queuing, various transportation conditions, landscape buffers, right-of-way dedication, and conditional zoning plans. There are three key policies that are outlined in your staff report, mainly dealing with the land use plan, airport overlay district, and the mitigation of impacts. As far as the land use plan, this site is within the northwestern portion of the city, and we have our Northwest Area Plan, the detailed study of that area. In looking at this area, the land use plan is one of our key documents that we look at. The land use plan does designate this area as future growth. Just for those members of the public, the area is highlighted in that purplish color or extended for restricted industrial use. The yellow is for low density residential. That's multiple forms of residential, not just single family only, at densities up to 5 units per acre. And we have our future growth area. I would note this future growth area designation was based upon adoption of the 2000 land use plan. Since then, there have been changes in the city's position in this area, and that future growth designation is somewhat outdated, mainly due to the fact that city water and utilities are now provided in this area. Lands that have a future growth designation are typically designated such as there are no utilities in that area. But in 2009 and 2010, water and sewer lines have been extended to this area. You have a water line about a quarter mile to the east and north of this site that runs along a stream corridor, and sewer line, and water runs right adjacent to the site along both Boston Road and South Bunker Hill Road. In addition, there was a Northwest Area Plan that took a further dive into evaluating this area, and that was adopted in 2011, and that provided more detailed evaluation of this area. Many of the recommendations from the Northwest Area Plan was based upon the Heart of the Triad study, and that plan, which was adopted, notes that this area should be designated for low-density residential densities. So with the establishment of utilities in this area and the Northwest Area Plan saying it's appropriate for development, staff is noted that this is an appropriate area for consideration of annexation and zoning requests. Now, I would note typically when you have a situation where the land use plan says one designation, the applicant is proposing something else, there would be a separate land use plan application that would be part of this public hearing. But the city has started its evaluation of its updated comprehensive plan. So as of January, staff has been advising all applicants not to submit a separate land use plan application, but that the land use will be considered as part of any zoning request until the comprehensive plan is updated. I would note the North Carolina General Statutes does permit the council to adopt zoning inconsistent with the land use plan as long as whatever you decide that is noted in the plan. Thus, this evaluation is both a land use plan and zoning evaluation for the site. And as far as the land use plan, based upon the findings of the Northwest Area Plan and extension of utilities, staff is finding that the request is consistent with adopted land use policies. The second key issue is the airport overlay. Any zoning request in the northern portion of the city, staff always looks at the airport overlay. That was established in 2003 as a result of the FedEx hub at the PTIA airport to mitigate nighttime noise impact. With the airport overlay, there are 4 zones, with 1 and 2 being the most restrictive, and schools are specifically prohibited in Zone 1. As you can see from this overhead projection, this site is outside the airport overlay, so there are no issues of concerns as far as higher restrictions due to the airport overlay, as the site is outside that area altogether. It's not even in Zone 4. So airport overlay was not an issue. And then, as always, we take a look at compatibility. The applicant has offered conditions to restrict uses. The institutional zoning district is intended to accommodate larger size quasi-public institutional uses on a campus-like setting of 20 acres or more. We do allow institutional uses on sites less than that, but typically when you have an institutional use on a site less than 20 acres, it was just allowed as a special use permit in all of our residential zoning districts. The applicant has offered conditions that are part of your packet that eliminates one of the high-intensity uses such as multifamily, townhomes, hospitals, and commercial uses that are permitted in the institutional district. With this school use, there's going to be traffic. So the applicant was required to submit a traffic impact analysis that was reviewed by the city's transportation department, including a staff report's detailed information table noting that at build-out, if this use is approved, there would be over 1,300 trips a day with more than 400 AM peak hour trips and almost 200 PM peak hour trips. This traffic impact analysis was reviewed by the Transportation Department. There were no objections from the Transportation Department. It included conditions for on-site queuing of vehicles of at least a half mile on-site, 800 linear feet of queuing for buses on-site. They did submit this conditional zoning plan showing their perimeter buffers, but also shows the 3 access points, one from Boylston Road and one from Bunker Hill Road and 2 for Boylston Road. At access point A, they've offered conditions for east and westbound turn lanes. At access point B, eastbound right turn lanes. And at access point C, they proposed 2 options, whether a straight-in option, but during their citizens information meeting, there were concerns raised by surrounding property owners about that curve on Boylston Road. And their applicant asked their transportation engineer, take a look at this sharp turn. There were concerns by neighbors about accidents that have occurred in this area. And they proposed as an option, and since both Boylston Road and Bunker Hill Road are NCDOT roads, the NCDOT will make the final approvals on these. But they've proposed as a option to realign that instead of having that sharp curve, to have a T intersection to address traffic safety in this area. This revision was reviewed by the High Point Transportation Department. There were no objections. The Transportation Department did ask them, hey, how about some roundabouts? That's another means of looking at traffic control. Their applicant's traffic engineer did that, and the results from our Transportation Department is whether you do this T intersection or whether you roundabouts, either option would mitigate traffic impact issues on this site at this location, but the NCDOT will make the final determination as to which option they wish to construct at this location. In addition to looking at access points into the site, their TIA looked at some of the surrounding intersections. At the intersection of Bunker Hill and Macy Grove Road, the TIA did not recommend any additional changes. At the intersection of Bunker Hill Road and Boylston Road, the TIA recommended turn lanes at both streets, and that's part of their conditional zoning ordinance. They also looked to the west or the east at Boylston Road and Atkins Road, and as part of the zoning conditions, they will be modifying that to make that a 3-way stopped along of turn lanes to mitigate impact. And just so you know, that orange dashed line that you see, that's a proposed extension of Gallimore Dairy Road from Sandy Ridge Road to Atkins Road that will be part of that industrial park development. Finally, they've offered conditions regarding landscaping. Our development ordinance requires a type B planting yard where a school abuts single-family dwellings that has an average width of 25 feet with 10 trees and 25 shrubs every 100 linear feet. The applicants offered a condition for a type A planting yard, which is the highest planting yard noted in our development ordinance, which has an average width of 45 feet with 22 trees and 33 shrubs every 100 linear feet. So that's a summary of the conditions the applicants offered. I would note for your consideration a summary of the findings that are noted in the staff report. As far as compatibility with the surrounding area, staff finds that it's not uncommon for institutional use such as a school to be located in a residential area. Based upon the conditions offered by the applicant, they pulled out the more intense uses, landscaping, traffic improvement conditions. Staff finds that the request as conditioned will be compatible with surrounding uses. And as far as mitigation and impact, those conditions offered by the applicant would mitigate impacts. We also look at, does the request, have there been any changes in the area to support the request and preferred development pattern? I would note the key changes as far as land use policy is now there is water sewer in the area. And based upon the findings of the Northwest Area Plan, this area is appropriate for development due to utilities being located in the area. And the request does promote a preferred development pattern. When looking at schools, the three things staff has concerns with is not being located in a heavy industrial area. We don't have that situation. If you're in the airport overlay that is not in Zone 1, this is outside the airport overlay area, and that traffic impacts have been mitigated and the applicants offer conditions to mitigate impact, thus staff is recommending approval. This item was reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission at their May public hearing. The commission recommended approval by a vote of 6-1, and they've included in your staff report their statement of reasonableness and consistency for your consideration. I know that's a lot of information, but is there any additional questions you may have of staff at this time?
I got a couple. Herb, if both these items are approved tonight, that property will come into the city of High Point as institutional property, correct?
Yes.
And institutional properties predominantly don't pay taxes, is that correct?
Depends on the use. There are a lot of uses permitted in institutional, as I noted earlier. You can do residential and institutional. In this situation, if they're proposing a school and that's owned by a governmental body, there would be no taxes. But that's based upon ownership and how the property is being used.
Okay, and as far as the airport overlay, are there schools inside of districts 1, 2, or 3 that you know of?
I believe there is a school outside High Point city limits off our Climate Farm Road, I believe, the yeah, that's not in the city limits, it's in unincorporated Guilford County, but that is in Zone 3. Our restrictions on schools in the airport overlay is specifically land within the High Point city limit only, and only in Zone 1. But I believe there is a school outside the city limits in Zone 3.
So I would assume based on that, we could make a pretty good assumption that in plenty of places around the country, there are schools, public schools inside of a airport overlay district.
I can only speak to this particular area of the city. That's the only thing I researched. And this site is outside the airport overlay, so none of those restrictions apply. And as always, with the city's airport overlay, those restrictions only apply to lands within the High Point corporate limits. Those restrictions do not apply to lands outside High Point city limits in the unincorporated portions of the county.
One more question, and I'm not sure that you'll have the answer, but maybe staff will. Currently, where are we on High Point? 55, 60 square miles, is that correct?
We have,
Just ballpark.
I believe we have approximately 50 square miles within the city limits. Our planning area is much larger, but lands that have been annexed and within the city's limits, approximately 50 square miles.
And in that, do you have a idea of how much of the land's greenfield versus brownfield?
No, sir, I do not know that information.
Anybody else on staff have that information? Thank you.
Anyone else on council have questions for staff? Thank you, Ms. Shannon. Okay, council will now hear from the applicant or the applicant's representative.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Amanda Hodier, and I'm here tonight on behalf of Guilford County School Systems. And before I get into my presentation, I wanted to let Dr. Oakley address you for a few moments. Thank you. Sorry.
Good evening. Just a few quick remarks. Just wanted to thank you first for the opportunity to share the Guilford County Schools proposed plan for the Katherine G. Johnson School for Science and Math. When we unveiled the $2 billion facilities master plan way back in November of 2019, it did include the construction of 7 new schools that were in growing areas of the county and also aligned with accommodating student enrollment. So we are, of course, grateful to the voters of Guilford County for the broad support that we've received from the community as we've worked together on these school construction bonds, because we know better buildings build strong communities. One of the 7 new schools included in the facilities master plan includes the construction of a K-8 school in the southwestern part of the county. Land for this project, of course, has not yet been purchased, but we have identified the site, which is why we're here tonight. The proposed school is expected to have a STEM theme, which includes labs, science, technology, engineering, and math labs, and is named in honor of the NASA mathematician Katherine G. Johnson, which was done by the Guilford County Board of Education. Many factors, as with any school, were considered when selecting a site. The proposed site on Boylston and South Bunker Hill is approximately 11 miles from the airport and is close to Kernersville's industrial area. And there has been a high degree of investment proposed in improvements for this site if selected, which you heard some of this evening, and including the traffic impact analysis. So, of course, just wanted to be here to say, naturally, there will be a great deal of oversight, intentionality, and thought that goes into ensuring roads are safe for a project like this. Our priority is always to make sure that our students and our staff members are safe and that we want to be good neighbors in the event that this site is selected. We're continually evaluating plans as a district gets closer to the design phase, but also as we honestly navigate increases in construction costs. We'll continue to make sure that we communicate that with those impacted and the public if we progress through this phase of the process and as new information becomes available. Thank you.
Thank you. My address for the record is 804 Green Valley Road, Suite 200 in Greensboro. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and present this rezoning request and annexation request. I'm here on behalf of Guilford County Schools. They are the contract purchaser, as you've just heard from Dr. Oakley, and the would-be builder operator of this facility if approved and if it moves forward. If I could pull up my presentation, sorry. Thank you. Thanks. All right, Dr. Oakley touched on this a bit, but I wanted to, for a moment, just dive into how we got here. This, of course, is an institutional conditional request, as you've heard from Mr. Shannon. But of course, we know we're all here to evaluate a potential school site, and that decision was not made lightly. There a lot of intentionality and a lot of research and investigation and elimination went into arriving at this site. So about 2 years ago, after the adoption of the 2019 Master Facilities Plan, when this area was identified as in need of a new K-8 campus, Guilford County Schools assembled a team to start searching for sites. Considerations in that search included being geographically suited between existing campuses. So we didn't want to be too close to Colfax, too close to Southwest, or Guilford Primary, those types of facilities, so that we could make the best use of our spacing. We wanted to obviously stay on the Guilford County side of the line when we're up on this far western end of the county. We wanted to, or you have to have proper road frontage. In your High Point ordinance, for example, you have to have a residential collector or higher. And that's really just the half of it. From there, functionally, you can imagine you need a lot of frontage for a school to space out and have an efficient circulation pattern. So that was a big consideration. We wanted access to public utilities, water and sewer. And that's really an economic factor. You know, being a good steward of these bonds that the school was fortunate enough to receive from voters, having public utilities means we have to purchase less land. And we're able to, again, have a more efficient design. We wanted to stay out of the airport overlay restrictions. You've heard from Mr. Shannon what those mean, and we'll go into that a little bit later, why we felt it was important to take that into account. Economic viability. You saw on your comprehensive plan map that Mr. Shannon showed, and I'm sure you all know, that there's a lot of high-yield industrial potential and ongoings in this part of the county, both in Kernersville on the Forsyth side and in High Point. So that means that land prices are high in this area. So we needed to take that into account and find the right economic conditions for this potential purchase. And then, of course, most importantly, we needed willing sellers. This is all private property transaction, and of course, if somebody doesn't want to sell, then that is the end of that potential site. So all that came into account. There's also the size consideration. You really need about almost 30 acres to do a K-8 campus. This process yielded about 14, 15 potential sites just from windshield survey, searches on LoopNet, MLS, typical real estate types mechanisms such as that. And from that list, and I will tell you the predominant factor being folks just not wanting to sell. That was a major reason, but we're down to one site. So this is it. This is not a situation of see what sticks or try something out and then go to the next. This is the site that rose to the top. It was the best site, and it is the only site that we're pursuing right now. So if this is not ended up going to be the site, then we would have to start this process all over again. This is a wide view vicinity map. I know you know this area and you've heard Mr. Shannon talk about it, but I really like to zoom out and get some context and some perspective. You can see the site delineated, outlined in red on the far side of your screen there. And what I want to notice about this picture, you see the proximity of the airport and you see a lot of development. As we've talked about, a lot of this is industrial commercial space, and a lot of it is housing, and that's a seesaw effect. We know that the housing follows the jobs. People want to live near where they have employment opportunities, and you're getting that effect both from the west, from Kernersville, and you're getting it from Greensboro to the east, and you're getting it from High Point to the south. So this is really a sweet spot of a lot of growth already happening and yet to come. A reason for that is you've got some space for it to happen, and you've got all the factors where people want to be with the airport and with all the employment opportunities nearby. So, I think you're probably all familiar with the overcrowding that's already existing at Southwest Elementary and the high school, of course. Colfax is projected to go in that direction, and we don't see it stopping. I know you all sit here every month and see the requests coming before you. You know the jobs are coming, you know the housing is coming, and the third pillar of that in a community has to be the public school system to make all that work. So we've got folks at GCS that do that planning and do that forecasting. That all went into the study in 2019. It's kept up with, and that is why we're here tonight, making sure that we follow through on those needs and make sure that the community has these public assets that it needs. This is a bit of context, how this site fits into those three jurisdictions that come together here. Kernersville is the brown to the north, Greensboro is the green to the east, and High Point is the purple to the south. Again, as you've heard from staff, this is predetermined to be High Point. That's been the case since the early 2000s. So this is not a policy reach or setting new policy or making new endeavors in that vein. This is predetermined, no matter who was standing here before you tonight asking for this site. It was always going to be High Point. This site just shows you that first factor of the site selection analysis, trying to make sure that we situated this new proposed location to where it wasn't right on top of existing facilities. To the south, that little trio is the Southwest schools. To the north, that's Colfax that you see. Due east is Western Guilford and Guilford Primary. So we think we did a pretty good job staying on this side of the line and getting right in the middle of everything else that's already going on, school campus-wise. The airport overlay zones, you've heard a lot about this, had to stay out of the District 1. We wanted to stay out of Zone 2. That was important to us because if it's not suited for residential, we didn't feel like it was suited for a place for children to be 8 hours out of the day. Zone 3, your ordinance requires different building materials. So we felt like that was a pretty good indicator, again, that probably wasn't ideally suited for the school if the school couldn't also, provide those higher building materials, and that, of course, becomes an economic factor that we felt like it would behoove us to be able to avoid. Zone 4 is where we looked, or outside of Zone 4. So, and that's what we were able to find with this site, as you saw from staff's presentation. And this is just that map again. This is our conceptual building plan. I want to emphasize conceptual. Of course, tonight is about land use, the institutional conditional request that we've proposed. But, of course, a feasibility layout does inform that. That's how we're able to make the right conditions. That's how we're able to do the appropriate traffic study. That's how we're able to dialogue with the community and be transparent. So that's what this is. This has been evaluated through your sketch plan review process, your TRC process. So we do know that it meets those basic feasibility and viability questions, which again was important to us before we came through this process. A couple of key features here that you see, and the key features have been committed to in the form of zoning conditions that you heard from Mr. Shannon. So while this is conceptual, the aspects of it that are vital to making sure that we have the proper compatibility here and the proper mitigation of impacts, those have been translated into zoning commitments. So we have the increased landscape buffer yards. You saw that on the slide from Mr. Shannon, went from a B to an A, which gets you another 20 feet and gets you over double the plantings. So we felt like that was important for our residential neighbors to the south and the west of us. We have, you see here, we were able to make use of the long linear nature of the site by siting the building to the rear, if you will, on the long end. And what that does is it means we have a lot of room for a nice long winding driveway, which means car stacking. So that entrance that you see, the one that takes the big wide turn through the fields, or curve rather, that is the dedicated ingress only for car riders, and that's double stacked. So that's the best way we can make use of to ensure that our stacking is happening on site and not on the road. And that was a key feature. So again, that is now in a zoning condition. So no matter how this moves about as we progress through engineering and field conditions, that linear footage of on-site storage has to be maintained. And then you see as you go through the parking lot, there's an egress only out point there at the middle of the site on Boylston. The ingress and egress at the very south end of the site on Boylston, that's for buses and deliveries only. So again, that was important. Earlier, I talked about lots of road frontage, and this is why. So we can separate those ingress and egress uses for car riders and bus riders. Again, that is a huge deal for efficiency. We also liked putting the building further back on the site, just so that it wouldn't be, the introduction of a new massive structure on this view shed of South Bunker Hill that doesn't currently have anything like that. You will note there is another access or roadway, if you will, that I've not talked about, and that's because it's private and it's not for the school's use. But I want to mention it tonight, just for everyone's clarification. So it's the one to the far west, just to the west or the side of the ball field that you see. And that's an existing private easement that serves the residential neighbors to the south of this site. So that's already on record. Those owners already have the rights and access to that, and that won't change. Currently, it's a straight shot, so it comes right through where you see the ball field. We've proposed to move it like this. I think that achieves perhaps some efficiencies for both, but that's not a unilateral decision. That's something that everyone would have to agree to, meaning the owners to the south. So if that ends up not being the case, then the easement will stay exactly as it is. But the key takeaway is that it's there, it's going to be there. It's something that will work in tandem with those owners to figure out the best place for it, and it will be fully private. It's not something that we're going to turn into a shared driveway for usage of the site. It'll stay exclusive to those property owners. We talked about the transportation improvement study. Mr. Shannon did. This is a key feature that I want to dive into for a minute because it's a big aspect of again, mitigating impacts and ensuring compatibility. These are rural, if you will, roads right now. We understand that. And so a change like this, a development request like this, with the trip generation that comes with it, of course warrants some improvements, some significant improvements, and that will happen with this project. And this is the process that identifies that and ensures that commitment. So a traffic impact study is done at the front end. It's submitted to High Point Department of Transportation and the North Carolina Department of Transportation. It's reviewed by those agencies. And actually, let me back up. Before it's even performed and submitted, it is called what's scoped. There's a scoping meeting where those agencies tell our engineers what to study and what to look at. That's how we knew to make sure that these new developments that you guys have approved that we don't know about yet get factored into the background traffic. That's how we know to make sure to consider the Gallimore Dairy Road extension that Mr. Shannon talked about. So all these things that are fluid and dynamic in the community get factored into the study because these agencies make sure to tell our engineers that. So that study produces a list of proposed improvements, and then that's reviewed by not only your city staff, but also NCDOT. And ultimately, the arbiter of this is NCDOT because these are state roads, and they tell us what improvements to do, how they have to be done, and what would get this site to a level where they can issue a driveway permit. So that's not a brokered or a negotiated thing. That is a mandate, and the only option is just to say no thanks. So that's a checks and balance that's very important to ensure that the public agencies have the final say in how to make this traffic pattern work. Mr. Shannon talked about this as well, but just an illustration of the process at work, both your traffic process and the community engagement process. We heard about this curve on Boylston Road from our community meetings, that it's already not an ideal situation, and that there's concerns that this development would exacerbate that. So we took that back to our traffic engineers. They went back and said, we can do better. So they proposed this realignment that really straightens that out, makes it a three-way stop condition, and they took that back to the agencies to evaluate. So to make that situation better that already exists even without this proposed development. So they said, yeah, that could work. Why don't you look at a roundabout too? So our engineers did that as well. So both of those are now on the table. And again, the final decision will come from NCDOT as to which one they think will perform better. And again, that's what will have to be done. There's been a question about the effect of a school like this on nearby properties. I know that's not a part of your zoning analysis as you sit here tonight. However, do want to make sure that we answer the questions that are on folks' mind. So we took a look at this. You'll see this chart lists several existing elementary schools. You got Northern, Oak Ridge, Southwest, Brooks Global, Colfax, Irving Park, Sternberger, and Summerfield. So we looked at property values within a 1 mile radius of these school sites, and then we compared them against property values at a 3 mile radius. And what we found is that properties within 1 mile, both in the city and in the county, were 26 and 24% higher than those further away. So we don't, we just don't find any data to support the notion that a school would devalue adjoining properties. And I think anecdotally we see that in the community. When there's a new school, we often see that drive a lot of residential development. We saw that in the northwest part of the county. We saw it with Southwest when Southwest was new. So I think when we have new good schools and we invest in that community infrastructure, that actually helps to bring the rest of the community along. And I think we see that here in the numbers. Development pattern, you heard from Mr. Shannon that it is considered compatible and not uncommon that we see schools in rural areas, in previously farm areas, and we see them in residential areas. In fact, as you heard, they are allowed in residential districts. We could have come before you tonight without a rezoning and asked for a special use permit instead. So we do know that that is considered a compatible use and that it does work. And certainly as Guilford County has grown and we've needed more schools, we have a history of going into these previously rural areas, Northwest, Southwest, Eastern Guilford, Southeast Guilford, Northern Guilford. So we've seen that this is a tried and true development pattern, not only here in the county, but across the United States and everywhere. We see that schools and residential go hand in hand. That's because it's a community community-oriented land use. It's about serving those in the community, so it's placed there. And when appropriately done, when appropriately mitigated and balanced, like we believe we've proposed tonight with your staff's help, that's done well, and it functions well. And so that's what we seek to achieve with our zoning conditions. Community outreach, we have been talking with folks about this and have a good contingency here tonight to continue with that. Our first open house, full open house, was April 18th. We mailed letters to everyone on the city's notification mailing that they do. Our second meeting was May 4th, and for that we not only sent the letters to the same notification list, but we also sent emails to everyone who provided an email address for us at the first meeting. So we got a wider swath there. We also posted it on the GCS's social media as well, and looked for help from the city too, getting that word out. Posted flyers. We also met separately with those property owners on Gray Lane that I talked about earlier, and that's because they're not just a adjacent stakeholder, they have a stake in their access and how that looks. So those are separate conversations, more technical, and so we wanted to have those discussions and get that dialogue going. And as I mentioned, that will continue going forward until that's decided how best these uses could coexist if this project gets to move forward, and that has to be a team decision. That's not something that we can make unilaterally, and that's how that will be handled. In terms of policy guidance and looking back at the analysis that you do have before you tonight, as we zoom back out to the request of institutional zoning with the conditions that are before you, you've heard about your policy guidance from your land use plan. It's future growth. That has happened. As you heard, that was a label from quite some time ago, and that has come to fruition. You've got the utilities out there now. You've got the growth happening, and as that has happened, this has been evaluated by your staff to be a reasonable manifestation of that growth. And I would submit to you a way to serve that growth as it has come and will keep coming. The airport overlays we talked about, that definitely shapes the land use in this part of your city, and we've taken that into account. Availability of utilities, you've heard about tonight, how that has come into play. Preferred land use pattern, we've heard that, we've seen that in your staff report. We've talked about that from back during the time of mill villages, when schools were central to those communities, to new modern planning practices such as traditional neighborhood design or new urbanism. We see schools being the focus, and that's because, again, it's a community-oriented land use, and when done well, it works well to be in the community that it's serving. And then, of course, we are taking full use of the conditional zoning platform. I'm sure you've got that ordinance in front of you, but it is chock full of mitigations and balancing mechanisms to ensure that we are that tight fit, that narrow land use where a school does fit well with intentionality and with purpose in a residential area. And we've done that through limitation of uses. The institutional district sometimes could include healthcare uses. It could include commercial uses. We've taken all that out to ensure that the institutional use that would go here is narrow and narrowly tailored to what would be appropriate. We've increased the landscape buffers so that we have that privacy, spacing, screening mitigation. We have committed to the TIA improvements. You've seen that in the ordinance, that the improvements that are called out and that are ultimately dictated by NCDOT will be the ones that happen. They'll happen with the development so that the infrastructure needs are in place when that traffic comes. The commitment for on-site storage, the commitment for additional parking, so that we ensure to manage our on-site needs. It's all in those conditions, and that's also seen the circulation pattern that I talked about in that conditional zoning plan, so that, again, whatever institutional use comes here is appropriately balanced and appropriately scaled and tailored for this location. I do have with me tonight our consultants from Davenport Engineering. They did our traffic study. I have Ms. Dion Brown here to answer any questions about that. We have several operational representatives from Guilford County Schools here that can answer questions about operations or potential construction questions. And then we have with us tonight also our team, our brokerage team that helped with that 18-month site selection process I talked about. So again, this has been a long process. It's been a very intentional process, and we're excited for the opportunity to talk about it with you tonight, and hopefully through this very reasonable and balanced approach, bring forth this community asset that balances everything else that you've got going on here in High Point. You guys work hard for all these economic development achievements that we've had lately. We work hard to keep this population happy here in the Triad, and the school system is a big part of that. So we look forward to answering any questions you have as the evening goes on. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for the applicant?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Amanda, well, and maybe it's someone from staff. You referenced the overcrowding at Southwest Middle and Elementary, and also the projected capacity at Colfax. Also, Southwest High currently has about 1,800 students. In terms of determining what would be the best, what best level of school to build initially, why K through 8 instead of high school?
So I can let Dr. Oakley answer that in more detail.
So briefly, it has to do with projected growth and who's having babies. I mean, it's really how it works out when we look kind of long-term. We are increasing choice at the high school level, which will naturally take away some of that over-selection. It's something that the board continues to look at. I think, we all know that the eastern portion of Guilford County is also exploding. Like, it's all about to connect up. I'll also just say, for fairness, that plan is 5 years old. The numbers are following what the plan said would happen faster at Southwest than Colfax, but the insertion of choice, the increasing seats at early and middle colleges are all taken into account during those projections. But it's not something you can do once and then wait a decade and do it again. It's going to constantly have to be revisited as businesses move here, et cetera.
Yeah, so the factors of, choice plus early middle college, you expect to be an outlet for the overcrowding capacity at Southwest. Some of those students will naturally matriculate out of there to other educational areas.
In addition to a planned Northwest area aviation high school, which is matching workforce development needs. So all of that kind of fits into the fabric of this. Of course, we are committed to stretching taxpayer dollars as far as we can, but all of those were taken into account when that plan was initially written, and will continue to be revisited as population growth happens. Yeah.
One other question. In terms of construction costs, if we are looking at, if this does not happen tonight, the level of building material that you would need for this particular zone, you may not be able to find in another zone. It may increase the cost. By what percentage do you think not building in this area would increase the cost of the construction?
Things are costing more every day. I don't have a crystal ball. I can tell you that when those numbers came out in 2019, things are costing roughly 40% more. That's without considering supply chain impact. And so we are committed to going in the order in which we told the public the first construction sites would be. This is one of those, but there are certainly plenty of other schools that need investments in infrastructure, material, and help.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilman Jones?
Amanda, you probably can answer this, but from what I've gathered, been at all the neighborhood meetings and the planning zoning meeting, but this was about an 18-month process to find, is that the correct timeline to find this property?
And that was before it even came to the realm of what I do and the land use work of it. So yes, it was about 18 months to get to the point of, hey, let's take this to the city and see if it has any viability.
And your client is Guilford County Schools, that's who you're.
That's
okay.
correct.
And your client has to go and spend this bond money to create schools, and High Point right now is the recipient of this project. If this does not go through tonight, we would get on the back burner. I would assume you would move on to your next project, or your client would move on to the next project, right?
That's my understanding. As you've heard from Dr. Oakley, there are other sites that were identified. This one was identified to be first. They're trying to keep that order. However, if the process had to start over, I think they would keep going with the other sites on the list and then have to revisit this one because I certainly don't see the need changing. So the need's going to be there, but certainly the train has to keep moving in terms of carrying out those new campuses and the reinvestment dollars at existing campuses. So this would, I guess, get revisited in due course several years down the road.
So best case scenario, our next option to get a percentage of this bond money to be a High Point school would probably be back in that 18-month to 24-month period. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, it takes, after all this, right, then it
Right.
takes the 2.5 years to
Build.
build and open. And so that would, of course, all be at the discretion of the Board of Education, who has shown their commitment to the plan as it is in the order that it is. The need is certainly there. I think the next High Point school that's like, if we're going in order of condition and need a facility, would be Shady Brook, but we're not going to get there. I mean, we're just trying to make sure that we're following what we told the public.
Thank you.
I have a question. You mentioned spacing, and you showed in your presentation where this school is located and its spacing in relation to other schools. What is the purpose that spacing serves?
Where it is on the...
It really seeks to create some, I guess, efficiency, equity, just among the populations that it's serving, so that people, as the district lines are drawn, which of course is down the road, that's not what we're here doing tonight, but as that process is looked at, so that people have the most opportunity and the county growth has the most opportunity to happen homogeneously, so that we don't see skewing towards where all the schools are located. And so you don't get, housing crowding up against, one part of town where all the schools happen to be. Or you don't get folks who do live elsewhere having to drive all to the same parts of town because that's where the schools are. And of course, that helps with traffic congestion. Schools do create traffic, as we've learned. They create the needs for improvement. So we don't want to necessarily pile that on top of each other.
Well, then I have a related question. It's my understanding there's a large piece of property beside the current Colfax Elementary. Was that site not considered? And if it was, what was the reason for not choosing that site? I think it's about 30 acres.
I don't know if I'm thinking of the same one that you're thinking of, but I do know that there was one site in that vicinity on our list, and it did not have a willing seller.
Councilman Moore.
Does the, and this may be a question for you, Madam Attorney, does Gifford County have the option to implement eminent domain? I mean, it's a public use under the Fourth Amendment, right?
There's a statute that allows school boards to use eminent domain. It's Dr.
Well,
Oakley
it
can...
should always be the last resort.
I was going to say,
I
Dr.
get
Oakley
it.
can
It
speak
should
to
be
this.
the
It's
last
not,
resort.
it's not what anybody wants
But
to
they're
do.
not,
Yeah.
if you want to talk about non-renewable resources, they ain't building no more land.
That's true. However, as a big part of the community, we want to work with the community and not be adversarial with it. So we hope to be able to do this the old-fashioned way.
Well, we all would like that, but
Yes.
sometimes life doesn't give you that option.
That is true.
This school and its location, it's a Guilford County school.
Yes, sir.
The percentage breakdown of kids that will be coming from Guilford County, Colfax, outside of High Point city limits is,
The districting has not been done. That'll,
well, as close as it is to the county line, you got to assume all these kids aren't coming from High Point, right?
it's
And
a-
you've also got to assume that we're elected to represent the citizens of High Point, including the kids. And hey, if you want to get the political emotions running, you start talking about children and you start talking about the elderly, and emotions will peak. So I understand that, that's kind of where we are on that. But it would be, when you ask a council to make these type of very important and emotional decisions, and we take an oath to uphold the best interest of High Point, it'd be interesting to know at least what your anticipation is of the attendance, because I don't think Colfax pays taxes in High Point.
Well, and Dr. Oakley can speak to that. At this point, I think it would be speculation about the districting, but what I would say, in terms of that difficult position that you all find yourself in, balancing the emotion versus the decision before you tonight, is, of course, this does ultimately come down to a land use analysis. And does the conditional institutional proposal before you tonight meet the analysis test of reasonableness and, ultimately not being against the public interest? So, certainly it could be a church with these same conditions that we've talked about, or some other community use. Institutional, especially the way we have it conditioned, is very synonymous with community use. So I think ultimately the question before you is this site, the way it's been tailored, appropriate as a land use for community use?
Well, I'm not breaking any news here. Since I was a kid going to school, things have changed immensely. I asked my father one time what it was like when we were kids, and he said, "Son, find a bus and go." But we grew up at a time where we had community. I knew from the 3rd grade where I was going to graduate from high school.
Right.
When my kids got of middle age, it had changed immensely. And his comment to me then was, "I'm glad I'm not in your shoes." So a lot of that's going on, and change is inevitable. But I'll just state this fact. We need to think about the philosophy behind the decisions we make, because all change is not progress, and all movement is not forward. Is enrollment increasing in your schools overall in each one? Or, I mean, I know you got I get what's going on, and I get that you were showing what happened in the other schools that used to be farmland, and farming has changed, etc. But where do you stand on enrollment, and what has this affect? I mean, we didn't know anything about a K through 8 school. So it's all totally new to probably most all of us, or those that are having kids there now. So talk to me about your enrollment and where you are, and if there's spots within High Point where you're seeing decreases and others. Obviously, Southwest is overcrowded.
Yeah, the southwest, northwest, and eastern parts of the county are seeing explosions in enrollment. Other areas are seeing slight declines in enrollment. I think our charter school projected increase is around 1,300 students, but we often see students return for middle school and high school. So it's a very fluctuating number. It depends on the zip code, the pocket of the community, and what other educational venues are happening. We also saw an increase of homeschool after COVID. Our whole country has seen that, our whole state and our whole community numbers are consistent with that. Will that trend continue? I don't know. We're at a meeting today where we heard a little bit about that from the state level. So what we do know is that southwest and northwest growth is happening, whether we put a K-8 school there or not. I am really committed to getting kids to the fullest extent possible out of mobile villages. Every mobile temporary unit we've put to accommodate growth is still there. It becomes a permanent fixture. And so just thinking long-term about how we provide good conditions for teachers and for kids and families. For the K-8 model, tons of research about it. But if you think about how families become connected to elementary schools, kids are there for 6 years. So my oldest child is about to go to middle school, which is just a 3-year experience. So you have these adolescents who aren't quite sure they're where they are, changing schools for the first time in their whole life. So there's a lot about connectedness, relationships, and academic and social outcomes that come out of this KA model. We have a couple states in our country that have gone there totally across the board, just in terms of of what makes sense for kids and their emotional readiness to navigate a new world. But it is tricky, 6 years in elementary, only 3 in middle, and then they reestablish identity and friend groups, et cetera, as they enter the high school experience for 4 years. So I think it's also just something to take into account for continuity. Families have relationships with staff that last longer. All of those are components that go into the decision.
Ms. Mayor, one question, this for Herb. Herb, current zoning of this land, could you remind us what this is currently zoned for? In the options within that zoning?
The current zoning is in unincorporated Guilford County, and I believe it's a combination of agricultural zoning, and some of the surrounding area is their residential single-family 40 under Guilford County zoning.
Okay. Has the owner come forward with any zoning requests to, I know they're actively trying to sell the land. Have they come forward with any other zoning requests? Has there been any other overtures from the owner for rezoning for any other projects?
This is the first rezoning request that I'm aware of for this property, as far as annexation zoning within the city of High Point.
Okay. Thank you.
2 more quick things.
Yeah, still,
Anybody down there?
floor still open to council members for questions of the applicant.
Can, you have someone here, you said from transportation?
Yes, sir.
Can I ask them a question? And can you pull up the picture of the corrections to the curve that everybody
Excuse me.
was very concerned about?
This one?
Yes, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
How far out, this improvement is an improved 2-lane road in each direction, is that correct?
Correct.
And how far, I mean, I can see it in this picture, but is that accurate as to how far that's what the improvement's going to look like as far as length?
It's not as accurate. It's a conceptual. We will definitely have to go through design plans to get it accurate, to make sure it's
Because
to design standards.
Bolston Road, as alluded, and other roads out there are very much older ribbon roads. And Bolston's quite a long road.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you're going to carry it halfway down to the bridge and then just let the other part of the road, be what it still is, I'm not so sure that's very effective analysis by the NCDOT, in my opinion. So I was just curious, so that area won't be considered for 4-lane. This is a conceptual 2-lane and where it's going to be. Is that correct?
Correct. Right now, DOT doesn't have any plans to widen the roads.
Okay.
And if I may,
Sure.
Mr. Moore, so the point of this particular exhibit, when they created this, was just to show that new condition. So they weren't trying to show every improvement. So to your point, and I think what Ms. Brown's trying to say is that this doesn't show the extent of the widenings or the lane work.
Okay. And are the potential sellers here tonight, or their representative?
No, sir, I do not see them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions for the applicant?
I'm sorry, just one question about the transportation design here. So we've got the base along Boylston, but the I guess the offshoot of this road, that leads to where?
So if you go north on Boylston, that takes you to South Bunker Hill.
Yeah, but off of the connecting point, the T, base T.
Those are the bus?
Yeah, yes. Is that
Those are the bus access.
that's the bus access?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was.
Okay.
Can I ask a question for Dr. Oakley, please? This is probably going to be very specific. Will there be lights on the athletic fields?
So we have to follow all the same coding that we do for other athletic fields. I mean, that's pretty specific in how we're coded and approved. If you want specific, like, numbers and how long they're on, I'll need to call in some backup on that one, but,
I'm just making sure there are lights on these fields.
yes.
Are there nighttime games in this grade level?
So middle school athletics typically start about an hour to 2 hours earlier than high school athletics. A lot of that's just at the discretion of athletic directors and how things get scheduled. But these are not like Friday night, 7 o'clock, central, they follow an earlier schedule, and they're typically on the off high school nights, because lots of siblings, lots of people want to be there together.
Well, the school,
Weekends are typically dark.
The weekends are, unless there's like a special event that we would have to approve ahead of time. There's pretty predictable, dark, quiet hours on the middle school schedules.
Thursday night is really the middle school night.
Thursday night right now is middle school football games. Right now, they start, it depends, but in the 5 o'clock-ish. I mean, it's not a 7 o'clock start.
Thank you.
that's good. Now, will the school be the only ones using the field?
So, we go through a pretty rigorous, if someone requests to use the field, and we take into consideration facts of, do we have the staff to make sure that it's safe? We have seen a significant reduction of people applying to do facility shared use agreements, but for example, like we had a deaf field day for our students who were not able to participate in something that makes sense, that's still in the scope of public school. But like all-night concerts are not something that would be approved for use of a school facility. And that process is very public-facing. It also includes cost to the person who's requesting it, and takes into account where, staffing, and safety along the way. It's a facilities use agreement that's on our website.
I have a follow-up on the lighting question. When we built our stadium, we used LED lights that are designed to limit the light overflow onto adjacent properties. Is that some technology that the school system is using? And if so, are you willing to offer a condition that any lighting on those fields would use that type of lighting?
Do you want to speak to this? John, sorry.
And while John's coming up, I would also offer, might be useful for Mr. Shannon to talk about the city's policy anyway, because I know you guys have a lighting ordinance that doesn't allow for any light trespass.
Yeah.
Which of course we'd have to follow, so it might be useful to hear about that as well.
Okay.
So, I'm John Simmons, I'm with Gifford County Schools. So, all of our new construction on fields are LED lights, and they are all set up to focus on the field so that you don't have bleed into outside communities or outlying areas.
Ms. Shannon, do you want to speak to that?
The city's development ordinance does have a lighting standard where a lighting plan would have to be submitted, and you've seen those if you've had a chance to look at our High Point University fields or the Piedmont soccer field. There's a specific intensity that they can't exceed from the property line. It doesn't mean you're not going to see the light, but it does focus on having down-facing, what we call cut-off shield lighting that forces the lighting onto the site and not onto adjacent properties.
Thank you, Ms. Shannon. Anyone else before we move on? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll now open the general public part of the public hearing. As I stated before, comments from the general public will be limited to 3 minutes each. I do intend to enforce that, so please keep an eye on the clock and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. I will call everyone in the order that they signed on the sheet. If you didn't sign on the sheet, you'll still have an opportunity to speak once everybody on the sheet has been called. I would ask that as you come forward, please, and approach the podium, please give us your name and address for our record, and that you direct your comments to the council and not to the gallery. First speaker is Julie Eschweiler.
Good evening, I'm Julie Eschweiler, 423 Gray Lane, Colfax, and I'll explain to you why this must be rejected on legal grounds. Gray Lane is a 110-year-old private road with a long-standing deeded and platted easement directly through the proposed school property. It feeds into South Bunker Hill Road, which is the proposed parent drop-off lane. Gray Lane families are landlocked, with the easement being the only way in and out of our homes. There is no legal road maintenance agreement among neighbors, and the school wants to be our neighbor. They want to combine lots and move the easement to the edge of the property, but this annexation and zoning request would actually be illegal regardless of easement location. Gray Lane homeowners have not agreed to move the easement, and multiple land use attorneys have advised that moving it requires a court order. Our attorney expressed our lack of consent in a May 19th letter to the zoning committee and copied you all. We have also notified this council, county commissioners, and school board at several public meetings. No solutions are presented for Gray Lane in this filing, and the final easement location is uncertain. We also have had zero discussions with anyone regarding full ownership and maintenance of our private road, which is the only way to keep calling it private. That cannot be legally forced on us, so you can disregard such comments from Ms. Hodiern as leaving it fully private as inaccurate. If you approve this request, as of today, our easement would become subject to High Point laws and regulations. Upon the closing date for the land purchase between the school system and Ronald Purdue, the easement would become educational property. Gray Lane homeowners would then become guilty of and forced into a crime for simply driving home over our easement with anything construed as a weapon. I did provide you with a printout of the various High Point, county, state, and federal laws for your convenience. If you vote yes, our constitutional Second Amendment rights will be infringed, and it's an easily foreseeable issue. Vote no, and they won't be. It's important to note that 2A infringement will occur with an elementary school or other various uses listed as allowable in this filing, including government facility, other educational facilities, and correctional facilities, among others. Guilford County School is just the applicant. It's your vote that would remove our constitutional rights, and therefore City of High Point would be legally responsible. The problems inherent to this situation can't be fixed. Tom Kirkman, Zoning Committee Chairman, hesitantly suggested a workaround where the county itself could own just the easement, with High Point controlling the rest. But this zoning request is for the entire property, and Guilford County is not a party to this filing. Contract zoning, whereby you negotiate a future fix, is illegal, and you cannot engage in it with Guilford County Schools. It also makes no sense to assign the easement to the county before a court of law determines its location, and the school system can't take us to court until they formally own the property. The date they do own the property, regardless of easement location, is when the infringement of our rights would begin as a result of your decision tonight. I will note that Ronald Purdue, the individual, would also need a court order to move the easement. We reject any assurances of our legal safety, verbally or otherwise, that may be offered, as they are contrary to law and not under the authority of this council to determine.
Thank you, Ms. Eschwaller. Next speaker is Chris Eschwaller.
Chris Eschwaller, 423 Gray Lane. I want to speak in regard to the safety at the site. We understand it's all hands on deck when it comes to school and children. Growth is outpacing our community's ability to provide services. High Point, Greensboro, and Winston-Salem Police Departments have statistics from February showing they are down by 246 officers combined. I'm quoting from a February 2023 article titled 12 Investigates Triad Police Shortages and Violent Crimes. Who would want to be a police officer? My number one priority, and I think our number one priority as an agency, is keeping the people who are here, says High Point Police Chief Travis Stroud. Cites a mass exodus in his department, which started at the beginning of the decade. High Point, where the city's police department is down 16% of its workforce, with 42 vacancies. March 2023 article. Department is down 38 officers, and at least 9 are leaving by the end of the year. We don't like to take off the armor and show that side, and a lot of them just don't want to complain, Stroud said. But I think that there is quite a bit of pressure. Stroud admitted that at a time his current team is struggling to keep up with the demand. In the first 3 months of 2023, the department averaged 393 calls per day, which is a 28.5% increase from 2022. I look at it like running a race, Stroud said. You can run, it's hard for a while, but eventually you get tired. It's the same thing for officers, whether it be physically and or mentally, those things start to add up. Stroud wonders how long officers can sustain this workload. He knows that they'll keep doing their best to protect the people living, working, and visiting High Point. We're going to go as hard as we can for as long as we can, Stroud said, but I don't have some concerns that if we don't start picking up some of these vacancies, the volume is just going to be too much for a small group to handle. A year prior, when we had 9 more officers, a High Point Enterprise article had this to say: Currently, High Point Police do not employ school resource officers for elementary campuses, and that's something that will likely not change anytime soon. The department has a shortage of more than 30 officers, and if there were financial backing for 14 school resource officers for 14 campuses, the logistics would not work. Even if we were to get the funding to add 14 officers, I don't think we could do it, Stroud said. I couldn't pull 14 officers to go to elementary schools without taking them off the streets. Does anyone in this room truly believe the zoning staff report which says the police department has no objections to this school, a school in a satellite area that will not even border High Point city limits, an area that is not currently patrolled because it's not even in High Point? I take Chief Stroud at his word when he says the officers don't want to take off their armor and complain. Our police department is overwhelmed, understaffed, and cannot guarantee a quick response to this area. Our leaders need to pace growth and match our resources which actually have in reality. And the same goes for our teachers. Also in the staff report, Mark Walsh of the zoning committee provided no specific reason why he voted against this plan. The entire room full of people heard him say the school system can't take away what they have. Thank you.
Dr. Patricia Schreiber, next on the list.
I am Dr. Pat Schreiber, and I chair the Stakeholders Advisory Committee in the development of the heart of the Triad Land Use Plan. I worked with the Strategic Planning Group. We had 19 members on my committee. We had 18 members from government officials on the Strategic Planning Committee, and we worked together. I held numerous community meetings to collect input and share planning information. Several hundred people were involved in the process. By truly working together for 3 years, we developed a model collaborative plan for economic vitality and quality of life that was approved in 2010 by 7 counties and municipalities. I addressed members of High Point City Council in 2010 and was present during a unanimous vote by your council. In 2011, High Point used the heart of the Triad Land Use Plan in developing the Northwest Area Plan. These are your 2 current land use plans. I know you're in the process of developing another one. It is not complete, and it has not been approved. Specifically, I'm addressing the area at the corner of South Bunker Hill and Boylston Roads, clearly identified in both plans as low-density residential, which would be a tax-generating property. In the heart of the Triad Plan, 7 bodies approved the following assurances, and the assurances were guarantees, not maybes or hypotheticals. Our vision was working together to enhance the heart of the Triad while maintaining its natural beauty and unique features. This is the plan, and I'm going to read from it. The first assurance was protection of property rights. The second, stewardship of our natural resources and preservation of open space. The third was infrastructure, and yes, Mr. Shannon, we did know that water and sewer was going out there in 2009 and 10 because this council approved it after the fact in 2010. Public input is the fourth one. Public information and development transparency. There has been no transparency. Sustainability, governance. So we would have multiple governing bodies, not one needed new government. We are asking you to be accountable for the City Council's vote, approval, and adherence for this plan and assurances. Please keep it low density. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schreiber. Next speaker is Tommy Hodgin. Good to see you back, Tommy.
Tommy Hodgin. I live at 460 Dilworth Road, Kernersville, North Carolina. My prior work history, I'm a retired paramedic, retired trauma nurse, been involved in this in emergency medicine for over 34 years. I'm going to paint a scenario for you guys right now. The worst case scenario for any of the guys that are in law enforcement, any of the guys in fire service, any of the paramedics out here is responding to a mass casualty incident, okay? It seems like mass casualty incidents have become I hate to say it, the norm of what's going on right now throughout this country. So response times are critical. Right now, High Point City Fire has a response time to keep their ISO rating of a level 1 of 5 minutes. The site plan said that they can get there within 4 minutes, but I don't think that takes into consideration the time it takes from the time the call is dispatched out to the firefighters getting on their turnout gear, their air packs, being able to respond to respond there. They have a 90-second time to respond from the time the call is dispatched out to the time they check en route. That gives 3.5 minutes to get to the scene. And they said that they can get there on the site plan within 4 minutes, but I tend to have a hard time believing that because you would have to travel around 60 miles an hour on those 2-lane roads to get there. Mind you, that will be in a fire truck that has tons of equipment and 2,000 gallons of water. It should have 2,000 gallons of water, either it's in a tanker or a 1,000-gallon truck, 1,000 gallons depending on what's on the truck. You guys also, I talked about addressing in a previous meeting, paramedics being able to respond. Paramedics responding to that area are going to be coming from Base 2 off of Montlou Avenue near the hospital out there. You're looking at about a 20-minute response time with Medic 6 coming out of Station 16 and Colfax. The other place they would be coming from will be Station Base 1 out of Wendover Avenue. I asked back in 8 months ago, I brought this up 8 months ago to you guys, and I gave proposals for the EMS needs to sit there and consider building new stations out in that area, and I haven't heard anything about that since then. The other thing I would sit there and say is in this new land use development, on this new site plan, I saw that you guys are building a fire station or wanting to build a fire station at Payne Road and Highway 66 to enhance the development and the response times within this area. Because of that, I don't believe you guys currently right now can make it there coming out of Station 14, or as we heard in the last meeting, coming out of Station 5 at Old Mill Road and Johnson Street, can make it to the area to be able to respond to meet your ISO levels of a level 1. And so I would humbly say, you guys need to take a look at this and really take this in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Next speaker is Regan Sears. Is it Regan? Did I get that right? Okay, thank you.
Hi. My name is Reagan Sears, 905 Quill Meadow Lane in Colfax. I have been both a local first responder and a resident of Boylston area for well over 20 years. Approximately 15 of those years were spent on the streets in some capacity listening and responding to dispatch calls. One major safety issue with the possible location of the new school and that everyday citizen is unaware of is the confusion the address may cause with delay in response time for EMS and police personnel. Because of the location of the school, there's a chance a call for service could be rerouted to 5 different dispatches: High Point, Guilford Metro, Kernersville, SHP, and Forsyth, for those 5 different agencies. This would greatly impact response time for the appropriate agency to respond, whether it be for a medical call, accident, break-in, or shooting. High Point Police and Guilford County have 2 separate dispatches. With the Guilford County Schools wanting to have High Point annex a location, High Point Police would respond to that specific address only. If an accident occurs on the street bordering the school, which can happen frequently, SHP would respond. SHP also does not always have a trooper close by, which would cause significant delays, specifically to clearing up traffic congestion on small 2-lane roadways. If an assault or other law enforcement-related incident occurs on the street adjacent to the school, Guilford County would respond. Again, a deputy is not always close by, and more so because it is on the border with Forsyth County and in a low-crime area, thankfully. Almost daily, these agencies will argue over where the incident originally occurred, for example, on or off school property. This greatly hinders help coming to the area when needed. Even more confusion can occur if someone calls an incident in a cell phone. Depending on what tower it hits off of, Kernersville or Forsyth County dispatch can receive the call, then have to reroute it to Guilford Metro 911 or High Point. It is widely known that police departments are significantly short-staffed and do not have the manpower to cover what it already does. Adding a school twice the size of Colfax Elementary at the most outlying location in the county, so much so that Kernersville could respond quicker than High Point, is very dangerous. You have to think not only of those students, employees of the school property, but also those that may linger off onto the residential property under county jurisdiction and issues may cause. That all being said, the Boylston Road location will have a major impact on response time to the school and surrounding areas, and will most importantly cause issues with the safety of the students, faculty, and area residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sears. Next speaker is Courtney Smith Pope, and the person after that is Ann Blankenship.
Good evening. I live at 712 South Bunker Hill Road. I would just like to take an opportunity to answer some of the questions that you answered, and it would seem from Google that the enrollment is down considerably from 22 to 2023, just by simply searching it. It seems it's down 20%. So I was just helping answer that. But you're going to hear tonight from so many amazing neighbors, and I'd like to touch on what she discussed too about just the safety of this two-lane winding street running around. I know you saw the site plan, but I hope that you have taken time in your consideration to actually drive around in all of the winds and curves of this very rural area. And it's now lack of resources. And if this is something that we think the community needs for growth, I think some pause and some time to wait to get the infrastructure put in place would be wise, especially with enrollment decreasing. Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Blankenship.
I'm Ann Blankenship, and I live at 8826 Boyston Road. I'm going to be reading a statement from my daughter, June Blankenship, who could not be here tonight. She is an environmental scientist and project manager in Charlotte. She specializes in streams and wetlands. She's certified in stormwater pollution sediment and is a DOT inspector. The Northwest Area Plan is the relevant land use to these parcels. The first goal listed in the report says to protect the natural environment and its features. The objective listed under this goal is to preserve mature trees and provide increased planting and replanting rates with an emphasis on native plant material. While reviewing design plans proposed by the Guilford County Schools, the building will be built in the only location that the mature trees reside on these parcels. These trees help to stabilize the area and the streams and wetlands. The National Wetlands Inventory shows that a stream currently runs along the southeastern, currently runs along the southeastern property lines of the proposed zoning site, further connecting to the West Fork Deep River. There's also where the retention pond will be placed and runoff into the stream through the outlet control structure. Runoff from construction at this magnitude will be mostly sediment and chemicals. It will be damaging to the streams. A stream located on the southwest portion of the site connects to the West Fork Deep River, which later runs into Oak Hollow Lake. Sediment and chemicals can travel miles into the Oak Hollow Lake. These parcels are very beginning of the Deep River watershed and will 100% contaminate any downstream areas. So this is the water for all of High Point. A building of this magnitude will forever change our water quality. And you may not think that's a big deal, but it is to someone who is an expert on water. Stewardship of natural resources is an important idea to remember when dealing with increased environmentally sensitive lands. High-level building will do more harm to the environment than good. And building a major school will have a domino effect on future development to surround it. By taking the first step in creating a school in this area, the natural environment in this area will suffer greatly. The diverse waterways and open areas will fail to exist with high levels of development. Preserving open areas or allowing for minimal development would be the only way to protect this area. So please vote no and preserve our open areas and water. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blankenship. Evan Booth is next, and after Evan is Amy Purcell.
Hey, I'm Evan Booth. I live at 807 Westbourne Grove Court in Colfax. Part of my job as a person working in the information security industry involves pen testing. And penetration testing is a proactive measure where basically I pretend to be the bad guy, I hack your stuff, and I give you a report with your findings. And you take that and you make your security posture better. All this to say, I earn a living in part finding issues in complex systems. Traffic is one of those complex systems. I built this traffic simulator to help me understand what the proposed school will do to the traffic in our area, in our community. And I found a couple of issues. I first aired those issues with this group 2 weeks ago. They are conspicuously absent from the staff report, but you could actually see the first one now. Those purple cars coming in, those are faculty. This is the morning rush hour. And they are unable to get to the faculty parking lot because that queue is obstructing the entrance into that parking lot. Now, if they come into the east side, which is egress only from Boylston Road, that's fine, that's a workaround, but the traffic impact analysis will need to be updated to reflect that. The other issue is far worse. It involves the underlying data used in the traffic impact analysis, and that is coming from the MTSA school calculator. And I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but that calculator is supposed to provide conservative estimates for the number of cars that we can expect to see on site each day. And this simulation actually uses the estimates from that calculator. But what I found, and I discovered this by just going 2 miles down the road to Colfax Elementary, is that those estimates were off. They were short by over 31%. So we can expect to see over 30% more traffic than you're seeing right now. Now, this is obviously a big issue. That you're making a basket, and that basket has to hold all the eggs. That your primary objective is to keep all those cars on this campus. But right now, you don't know how many eggs are coming, and that's a critical issue. And this rezoning request requires that traffic impact study, and I think it has critical flaws. Now, if you want to roll the dice and move forward with this, just for the sake of transparency and accountability, when we do see the media reporting on our first fatal crashes from cars sitting on Bunker Hill Road, you should expect to see your names in that report alongside this video. They were made aware in June 2023, and they did nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Amy Purcell, and the next speaker is Tom Lamb.
Juggle a couple things here. Hello, my name is Amy Purcell. I live at 416 Gray Lane in Colfax. Remember 2020? It was when the world changed. The COVID pandemic arrived and everything was immediately different. Our mobility, personal interactions, work, play, every aspect of our living changed. Every organization, institution, business, and individual had to reevaluate and rethink prior assumptions and pivot. That is except for Guilford County Schools. The multi-billion-dollar bonds have provided them with some sort of immunity, and they think they can charge forward with pre-pandemic assumptions. Southwest and Colfax Elementary are not overcrowded. Enrollment has declined 22% and 9% respectively. Families are leaving public schools, and some of them are even planning on taking their funding with them. On March 13th, the landowners of Gray Lane met at CBRE. One family drove over 800 miles to attend. Another left their daughter's hospital bedside. Ms. Hoderine informed us that something came up, and all she could share with us was one image with our road moved, attached to nothing, and asked us what we thought. 4 days later, she emailed engineer Jason Lemke that we had nothing specific to say and tells them to go ahead. She then sends a Hello Neighbors letter dated January 23rd, announcing a meeting on April 18th. Hello Neighbor meetings 1 and 2 did not go well, but that is perhaps because Ms. Hoderine was busy filing the week-late rezoning and annexation applications and filling in all the blanks and correcting the dates of the letters, like the one above, which is now April 7 in your report. Who has been included in the pre-design discussions, design and site selection? The City Council? The community? Instead of engagement and inclusion, GCS hired a development firm and an attorney. Their behavior has been secretive and shows a pattern of deceit and manipulation. The development firm, CBRE, selected this site to open up development. It is their Trojan horse. Residents were deliberately kept in the dark, and now this project is being rushed. Not even the city of High Point can keep up. Where is transparency, honesty, public engagement, and accountability in this process? The Gray Lane landowners have not been contacted since April 5th. The misinformation continues about enhanced landscaping and property values. The other sites under condition have not been revealed, and the most obvious one, 53 acres next to Colfax Elementary with additional access, has not been contacted.
Thank you, Ms. Purcell.
It has a willing and motivated seller.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Lamb, and the next speaker is Patricia Derrick.
Tom Lambeth, 416 Gray Lane, Colfax. Excuse me. I'd like to talk to you about aspirations, your aspirations for the kind of city High Point can become. I happened to see the presentation about the future image of High Point, a rebranding as a creative community. In my opinion, a creative community is a sustainable community, one that recognizes and cultivates its natural, economic, and cultural assets. Creating an ethos of sustainability requires forward-thinking governance and collaboration within the community, a community in which the citizens believe in the governance process. Maintaining sustainable natural systems involves preserving open space, protecting sources of drinking water, and providing access to these systems. Creating sustainable economies necessitates the provision of jobs, cultivating a conducive business environment, and offering training and education for workers. Taking advantage of cultural resources for a sustainable community means that first, these resources must be recognized and celebrated, then collaborate with these resources. And what I'm really talking about are the people, like these people here tonight. These good people of Colfax who are here to try to understand what version of High Point we'll be part of. Will you approach us as collaborators, as future citizens, as good people who want to be part of this new High Point? Or will you disrespect and disdain our passion as your zoning and planning commission did, practically laughing at us? This property that you're considering for rezoning and annexation is not vacant or uninhabited space. Not only is it part of the vibrant Colfax community, but it also represents the ultimate headwaters of the Deep River and Cape Fear River systems, the source of drinking water not only for High Point, but also Jamestown, Greensboro, Durham, Fayetteville, Southport, and Wilmington, among other small towns and communities along the way. Do you really want to further threaten the already impaired source of drinking water for 29 counties and 165 cities and towns? There's a reason this area has been designated as low-density residential in every land development plan for the last 50 years. A creative, sustainable community would see its role not as an isolated entity, but as part of an interconnected state that values its relationships and resources. Please rise to this occasion. Take advantage of this opportunity to truly be a creative, sustainable community. Please reject this rezoning. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Patricia Derrick, and then the next speaker is Michael Logan.
Patricia Derrick, 8861 Boylston Road. So I want to go on the record first and say we are not opposed to change. We know change is going to come. We know something's going to happen with this property, but we would like it to stay low-density residential. Tonight, you've heard the Northwest Plan and the Heart of the Triad Plan were thoughtfully developed to leave this area as low-density residential, as a buffer to the nearby ever-growing commercial properties in this area. Instead of developing a regional government, City of High Point included, agreed to the proper governance, cooperation, and coordination of those land use plans. Show of hands, how many people rode by this property? Thank you. We appreciate that. So, about our community, Colfax is a small community of 4,587 residents. Our median age is 49.8. A lot of the folks in the area seem to be empty nesters from what I can tell. Colfax main attraction is the Piedmont Triad Farmers Market. When I hear that, I think agriculture, just how this land is currently. Again, this area is currently under the Northwest and Heart of Triad Plan. We've had over 537 citizens sign a petition, so for such a small community, that's a lot of folks who are against this rezoning annexation. Our community has put in an exponential amount of time and research on this over the past month and a half to look at alternate solutions and really dig into all the data. There is over 50 acres now available. We've spoken with the realtor near Colfax Elementary. We have no good reason that we've heard of why that can't be considered. We've also met with High Point Schools Partnership. They agreed that redistricting, that the current schools within High Point are not at capacity, and redistricting would solve the issue. Seems no one wants to redistrict, though. A new school will further pull resources and funds away from other High Point schools. We spoke to the High Point School Partnership about that too. These solutions here, alternate solutions, reduce costs for everyone, the city and taxpayers. In summary, so far tonight, you've heard significant legal issues brought up again about the Gray Lane easement, constitutional Second Amendment rights, things about contract zoning, how surrounding property owners lack representation in the matter. You've also heard about significant lack of transparency and misrepresentation from Guilford County Schools, CBRE, and the attorney involved. We ask that you take all this into consideration and vote no against this rezoning and annexation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Derrick. Michael Logan, and then the next speaker will be Dion Brown.
Hello, my name is Michael Logan. I live at 5202 Rambling Road, Greensboro, North Carolina. I know about living next to a school. I bought my house because ad in newspaper said walking distance to Northwest High School. My children went to Stokesdale Elementary. My children went to Northwest Middle. They went to Northwest High School in a progression. The school that we're wanting to build in Colfax community is not a community school. It is a magnet school. It is a magnet school that is going to be drawing students in from outside of that area. Now, if the area has a concern over students being brought into outside of the area, that is for a school that is not going to necessarily benefit the students of that area, that should be of concern. Their rights matter. Now, with that being said, we've already talked about the low enrollment in High Point schools. As council member, I'm pretty sure you were familiar with the conditions of High Point City Schools. We're building a high school outside of the city limits for you to annex for High Point. Why are we not fixing up the schools in High Point? Why are we not taking care of the schools in High Point? Because I'm going to go ahead and tell you, when the plan was built, Colfax Elementary, 109%, Pierce Elementary, 110%, Oak Ridge, 108%, Stokesdale Elementary, 122%, Northwest Middle School, 123%. That's where your kids are going to be coming from for this school. You need to make Guilford County schools fix and repair High Point schools. Take care of High Point, don't add more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Logan. Dion Brown, and then the next speaker is Lori Sterling. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. I got you. All right, Lori Sterling.
Hi, my name is Lori Sterling. I'm from 941 Maple Creek Drive in Colfax. And while the applicant has an uninhibited amount of time to speak, I, like the other representatives from Colfax, I'm going to try to cram as many issues as I can in my 3 minutes. The annexation request submitted tonight by stand-ins for the landowners to Guilford County Board of Education should be denied. There are several substantive issues which make this request unacceptable for consideration, including conflation of annexation and rezoning. The first issue is that the landowners did not approach the City of High Point requesting the land to be annexed. Except for the offer to pay the landowners with taxpayer money over twice the market value of the land, the owners would not have petitioned the City of High Point for annexation. I think you heard that from Mr. Shannon. If the annexation petition is denied, will the landowners continue their annexation request? I think not. There's a 60-day transition period between annexation and rezoning. The fact that the landowners were approached to sell their property at a substantial amount of money above the market price demonstrates that the incentive for the annexation petition is money, not a desire for their property to be annexed into the City of High Point. By statute, the City of High Point cannot guarantee that the land will be zoned for a school after annexation. The property is not located within the City of High Point's extraterritorial control. If the City of High Point is guaranteed the Guilford County Board of Education that the property will be zoned for a school once the property is annexed, the City of High Point is engaging in illegal implied contract zoning. Since there is a 60-day waiting period by statute between annexation and zoning, the surrounding property owners have a right to challenge rezoning the land for a school annexation. If the rezoning is denied, the landowners will be stuck with their land inside the City of High Point, and I feel confident that the landowners were given assurances regarding rezoning, which shows again the lack of concern for the community and the denial of their voice, our voice. The second issue is the community's opposition to the annexation and the subsequent rezoning of the property for a major school. The opposition is due to safety concerns, as you've heard, noise issues, light pollution, and many others. The City of High Point must consider the impact on the surrounding property owners as stated in court cases. All of those property owners oppose the school. The third issue is that the proposed school is not for the neighboring community, as Mr. Logan said, but to transport students to the proposed school from other schools. In other words, this is not a neighborhood school, but a holding school for overflow students. This school will not benefit the community in any way, but will bring pollution and nuisances, as stated previously. The fourth issue is what the school board is the school board said, it's the need for more classroom space. No one has heard or read that the Guilford County schools need for cafeteria, ball courts, any of that other stuff, only classroom space. Thank you.
Next speaker is Kay Sterling.
Picking up where Laurie left off, the fourth issue is what the school board states is the need for the proposed school. I'm sorry?
Just get the microphone so you can.
Oh, okay, no problem. Do I get to start over?
Yeah.
3 minutes? Can I do that? Could you read?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Are we going to do the clock? We're going to.
Stopped it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No one has heard or read the Guilford County School Board express the need for more cafeteria space, more playground space, more soccer fields, or more baseball fields. Classroom space is the issue according to the school board. If so, why build a new school to get what has been identified as the need? Classroom space. Why not add brick and mortar classrooms to the existing Colfax School and the Southwest schools? Why spend borrowed money for a cafeteria, playground, and ball fields that are not needed? Why spend borrowed money on a new school when a different, better, and cheaper alternative is available? The fifth issue is the secrecy surrounding the annexation of the land and the plan for the proposed school. The transaction was dissembled to conceal facts and intentions with deceptive explanations and reasons. The Guilford County School Board internet site reads that the board involves communities in planning. I do not know what communities the board has been talking to about this proposed school, but it's not the Colfax community, which will be directly affected by the proposed school. The sixth issue is the noncompliance of record requests by Guilford County, the Guilford County School Board, and the North Carolina Department of Public Education. One request dating back to April 18th. All the requested information is available, but most never provided. The Colfax community has opposed this annexation from the time it was revealed by the City of High Point when zoning signs were placed on the property. No one in the community has spoken in favor of the annexation. No No one has requested access to the utilities installed by the city of High Point in anticipation of steamrolling our community to comply with the city's plans. The seventh issue is that the annexation request before the city of High Point does not qualify as a satellite annexation since the property is more than 3 miles from the High Point city limits proper and outside the city's extraterritorial control. The land in question does not qualify for spot zoning, since spot zoning has been defined by the courts as a piece of property owned by a single individual. There is more than 2 people owning this property. Previously, spot zone property cannot be used to determine satellite annexation territory and extraterritorial control, as according to North Carolina GS 160A. We believe that the city of High Point has no legal right to annex the property. Notwithstanding the triad land use, the plan does not supersede statutes and judicial findings. The land use plan does not make law, but is merely a land use view for the future. The 8th issue is the benefits.
Thank you, Ms. Sterling. I appreciate it. Okay, that brings us to the end of the list. Is there anyone else who would like to speak either in favor or against this item? Okay, ma'am, please come forward and give us your name and address for our record.
Hi, Dr. Robin Sowell. I've been here a few times. Sitting here, I realize this is an annexation hearing, right? And every time they present it and they tell you, this is a great place for a school, and somebody's like, is this really how we're going to draw the kids in? And then it's an annexation hearing. You're not really debating whether it's going to be a school. That's not the question you're supposed to be necessarily answering. I'm going to suggest that needs to be the first question you answer. Every time I look at that map, I think, it's right on, the county line. It's 2.5 miles from Colfax Elementary, which is not overcrowded. It's a High Point school. How are those kids getting there? Nobody will talk about redistricting because that is the kiss of death, apparently. I know this is an annexation hearing. Deciding whether that's a good place for a school is not what's supposed to be addressed here. I'd suggest it really needs to be the thing you need to know before you spend your one shot on a school for High Point. You spend how many millions of dollars you commit your kids, the children of your constituents, which is not much of us, to going there. 15 years from now, it's probably going to be a great place for a High Point school. I don't know that it is now. It's not the point of this hearing to decide that, but I think you really need to pull your jets and decide, yeah, that's where we want our High Point school, because this is the only choice we're going to get in that decision. Make a good one.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to speak? Yes, sir. Please come forward and give us your name and address for our record. Sure.
My name is George Jackson. I'm at 9163 Otto Cox Road in Colfax. And I don't have any prepared remarks. Actually, I'm sort of new to this issue, but I appreciate everybody that did make remarks against the annexation. And I would just like to register the fact that I'm against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Mayor, could you ask Ryan if he could bring it back up to normal? So the mic's a little bit higher back.
Yeah, I want to raise that. Yes, sir. Hold on one second. He's going to raise that podium up for you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Please give us your name and.
Mark Rogers, 408 Gray Lane. This site should never have been selected just because of Gray Lane. All right, so we had meetings earlier with the developers and Amanda. Never got one straight answer. I was laughing tonight because there was a different answer about Gray Lane tonight. During the zoning meeting, they came out, because we talked about our Second Amendment rights. They said they're going to make that a county road, so that they'll take it off the school property. Now I hear again tonight, oh, that's going to be a private road. Every time they say something, it's a different story. So I'll tell you right now, just be ready for a legal fight. And then again, she said, well, that road can stay right where it is. So if that road stays right where it is, goes right through that ball field, how much smaller acreage is that property? And if that is a private road, kids aren't going to be crossing that private road because we're going to have the liability on it. So this site should never have been selected with a road going through it. And yeah, I guess you can do your eminent domain, and we'll fight you in court, whatever we have to do, but this isn't the site to be doing this. And all my neighbors, nobody agrees with this. I'm fortunate, because that's just a second home for us. It's not a primary home. I won't have to deal with all that traffic, but I feel bad for everybody else that has to. But there's going to be a better site than this. There really has to be. And every time I hear about that road, every meeting I go to, it's a different answer. It's going to be a county road, or it's going to be a private road. No one's, we told them right from the get-go, we're not moving the road. We don't agree with it. And yeah, it's going to be eminent domain, and it'll be a fight in court. So that's the reality of it. So I suggest you take your time and find a better site for a school. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to speak? Yes, sir. Please come forward. Sir, you've stood up 3 times. Do you want to speak?
Come on, Patrick.
Oh, okay. All right.
Good evening. My name's Jose Mendoza. I live off 5014 Philly Lane, Colfax, North Carolina. Haven't had the pleasure of meeting my neighbors. My wife and I were new to the area. I'm your common Joe, working hard. I moved to the area because my wife and I, we wanted a place where we could raise our family without any issues, And we actually came out of that dreadful California. And there's no issues with schools, as they mentioned, being over airports. That's not even an issue out there. So I don't see what the big fuss about that is. But I would ask that you guys would consider to not build a school here. Like I said, I moved here, with my bride to hopefully start a family soon and be able to, be in a place where it'd be safe for my kids, to be out playing. I drive every morning through those little areas, and already the school buses that pass through there, within inches, always hitting me on those curbs. I see my neighbors out there standing, waiting for their kids to hop on, on these buses. And already with 2 buses that pass by there that I've experienced, I'm waiting there 10, 15 minutes, and I leave early, because my wife tells me, better leave early before you get a ticket. And so I just want to make sure that, the voices are heard, cooler heads may prevail, and just ask you, please, to, consider everybody's, comments and the reasons as to why this will not be a great idea. Again, I'm new to the area, and I just felt as the average Joe needed to speak up, for his neighbors as well. So thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Mr. Mendoza. Anyone else who'd like to speak?
That would be me.
All right.
Thank you, guys. My name's Jack in the Box. Just kidding. I'm Patrick. I'm at 941 Maple Creek in Colfax. Hey, so I was supposed to read a script here, so I'm going to apologize for not reading it verbatim. So Mom, don't spank me when I get home. But I think that the city council really should look around and see what's happening here. It's a personal thing. Look at these people that came here that have spent their time over the course of the last couple months trying to put this together and see what's going on when you're dealing with a Goliath. And here we are as a small David trying to make this thing work for a community that wants to be left alone, really. We live where we live because we want to be there. If we wanted to be in High Point, we would move to High Point. There's nothing wrong with High Point, but we don't want to be surrounded by High Point. I don't vote for you guys, and I need representation. Colfax needs representation. And from a legal perspective, when you think of representation, what do you think of? Somebody you get to have an opportunity to speak about it. Representation means I need to be on that board, helping to make a decision. High Point's making a decision for Colfax. That's wrong. These people that live right next to where this school is going to be, a 100-year-old farm, if you listen to the stories, they're very personal. These things building the school there, what's it going to do? You put it on Forsyth County line? The deputy that spoke EMS person that spoke. Kernersville could respond quicker than High Point City or Guilford County, for goodness sakes. Now let's look at the taxation portion of it. You're giving away the potential for tax revenue. Even if you annex it into High Point in the future and left it as residential land, you're not getting anything from the school. You would be better off as High Point council members to approve it and leave it for residential property than you would to put a school there. It just doesn't make sense. I think these people have spoken enough about this. I think we've all listened to it. We've had some good commentary from the Guilford County schools, but it doesn't take us as Colfaxians into consideration. It really doesn't. And in my opinion, for you people, as nice as you are, to sit up there and make a decision on whether we live beside a school or not is wrong. I don't think you have should have the right to do it. And then I talk to you, I want you to go to see Denton, in the city of Denton. The good people of the South in Davidson County fought against this and had the same issue come up. The state ruled against that and didn't allow that building to be built.
Thank you, sir.
Please take that in consideration.
Anyone else who'd like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Beverly Gray. I live at 408 Gray Lane. This school is not about the children. This school is not about the community. This school is about tax dollars. This school is about how much tax revenue can High Point pull in. That's what this school is about. Again, I live at 408 Gray Lane. There will be a ball field right outside my bedroom window. Lights, action. We want a hot dog, I guess we go to the concession stand for dinner. So, again, this is about tax revenue. It's not about the children. Look at your High Point schools now. How many of your schools are closed? How many are temporarily closed? How many of them are abandoned? How many of them don't have staffing? How many of them don't have children? But you're going to build a new school just a few miles away from Colfax Elementary School. Where are these students going to come from? As they said, if you look at the Colfax community, they're middle-aged. They're 40s and 50s and 60s. I don't see 60-year-old women having babies. So who are you going to fill these schools with? High Point? Winston-Salem? How far out are you going to go to bring these students in? Again, it's all about tax revenue. It's not about the kids. It's not about the community. It's about how much money can High Point bring in. So how much are you going to take away from us? Please, please decline this, I ask you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, you got in right under the... All right.
I just wanted to give you guys 3 more minutes to listen to somebody. My name is Robin White. I'm at 925 Sam Court in Colfax. And this school doesn't impact me. I have children. We've made the conscious decision to homeschool because we don't really agree with what's going on in the school system. But what does impact me is the traffic. And I just want to paint a couple of pictures before I get to my real point. And that is, this area has outpaced, residential housing has outpaced this area. So there is a lot of building going on. There's no grocery stores nearby. There's no CVS, Walgreens. It's a distance. It's 10 minutes solid to get to any of them. Talk about fast food chains, there's nothing there. This is a community that enjoys getting outside, that enjoys having chickens, having livestock, horses. They're all around where this property is being designed. So what I really challenge you guys to think about as you make this decision is, what problem are you solving? And do you have the data and the details to really solve that problem? So we're talking about a school. We're talking about a school in a city where student enrollment is down. We're talking about a school in a city where employment and teachers in those schools are down. Are we really making the right choice right now by doing this? And do you have the data and the facts to make that choice? We're hearing general numbers shared, but really it's like an eagle soaring above, not looking down. It's macro, not micro. So before you impact all of us, me as well, being a Colfax citizen, do you have the right detail to be informed when you're making that decision? So just like Common Joe over there, I'm a common Jolette, and I will say I stand with the community, I stand against this school, and I hope you guys do as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing then, and I'm going to open the floor to our council members for any questions or a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to call up a few people to ask some questions, if that's possible.
Sure, Councilman Jones, you're recognized.
Could I get one of the officers from High Point PD to answer a couple of questions about public safety?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Some of the claims that were made or questions that were brought up will be about your ability to respond in case there was a school fight or mass shooting, all the spectrum, right? That will potentially be High Point city property at some point if this were to go through. Would it only be you that would have the jurisdiction to respond if something happened on or around that property?
Well, first, I'm Deputy Chief Anthony Gamble, and thank you for allowing me to speak. When we have casualties like that, everyone knows we all kind of respond. We all cooperate. Gifford County, Forsyth County, as you've seen in any other mass incidents, we come together as one. As our response time might be affected, sure, it has been stated we are down about 40. That's no secret. So staffing could take it could have some staffing, could have some impact on it, but the nature of the call could have some impact, how dispatch holds the call and then dispatches to us. So it's a lot of different things that play in effect for us to respond to a call, but anything that's casualty, we are responding immediately, and all hands are on deck.
And would you still have it, there still would be an SRO or not assigned to this property?
Currently, we have SROs only in high schools and our middle schools.
Okay. But this being,
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I was thinking about that, why they said K through 8. I was really thinking about that. That's something we haven't come across, and that's something that we would have to think about and consider.
there would be? Okay, thank you. All right. My next question actually would be for our city attorney, Megan. We have situations where the city's considering buying property, right? So I know in those things, we aren't allowed to discuss things outside in the public because it can affect the numbers of the deal kind of thing. One of the complaints that I've heard in some of the meetings and emails is that they weren't made aware of this situation until very long in the timeline. I didn't even know about it until I saw Ms. Blankenship's post on Nextdoor was my first thing. But when I asked the attorney, is this very similar to the reason why we would not be able to discuss it?
I would probably defer to their attorney representing them, but generally, yes, that, the Guilford County schools are a unit of government, just like local governments are, just like municipalities are. So, there's only certain reasons that you can discuss matters in closed session. One of them is property acquisitions for cities. And certainly that is something that perhaps could have been the case for the school system as well, but I would defer to their attorney specifically about when anything came to light or when any of it was made public. But they're it's a government entity just like we are, so they're regulated by the statutes and they have certain things that must be talked about in public and only a handful of things that can be discussed in closed sessions.
Okay. And the second question for you was, at the end of the planning and zoning meeting, I came up to you and we discussed briefly about, refresh my memory about how there were some comments about Second Amendment and how this could affect their Second Amendment rights. Can you elaborate on that as well?
Sure. That is a matter between the private property owners, essentially. So it is something that would be between whoever ends up owning the property. So right now, the property owner on the application is still Mr. Purdue. It's kind of outside of the scope of a planning discussion on who the ultimate property owner is going to be, if it's going to be Guilford County Schools or Guilford County, but that's something that's kind of outside of our purview, looking at the two private property issues at stake there. So that would be between the Gray Lane owners that have access to the easement, and then whoever ends up owning the property.
Okay. My next question would be for Amanda, if you don't mind. Ms. Odian. I think I asked you this before, but is it, the school system would not own the property, it would be owned by the county, is that correct?
That's correct. That's the methodology that's used across the board. Guilford County owns and holds the property, and the school system simply uses it for the school.
Okay. And since I spoke to you this morning, I did get a message stating that you had mentioned at some of these meetings that there was discussions of little leagues, just reading off the message, little leagues, pony leagues, and YMCA leases that were discussed as a potential use of these athletic fields.
So we've gotten the question as it came up tonight, would there be other uses here?
Right.
And so we have, talked about the joint facility use agreement that Dr. Oakley referred to, and that's just a common practice that exists in the school system. You can apply, go through a very transparent and criteria, driven process to apply, and they can choose to grant that or not. The example that I've talked about in community meetings is, I know in Summerfield, there's a lot of youth leagues that use Summerfield Elementary. So that's that process at work. I think the other sort of the other thing at play there is your own city facilities for those things to exist at. So if your Parks and Rec department and infrastructure is robust enough that it already has a facility for those things, I think then it's not choosing to utilize or coexist on these other community areas. So I think that's a decision. If that's not something that you as a community want to utilize your school sites for, then that's something that you can choose to keep within in your Parks and Rec system.
Okay. And then someone had mentioned about this potential property next to Colfax around the Market Street area. If I'm correct, didn't that have some topographical challenges plus the traffic on Market Street as well?
It did, and I was conferring with our site selection team during the discussion, and that site was actually eliminated from the top because of its proximity to Colfax and the existing traffic issues on West Market. It just would have been something that was unsolvable. Through any TIA or any mitigation, it just would not have worked. Additionally, the topography and the stream corridors that cut up that site make it, the usable pockets are not big enough for a campus. For a school campus, you really need a cohesive area. A residential subdivision is very nice when it has stream corridors and rolling topography. Even industrial sites, you can put the building pads in different pods. But for a school campus, especially younger students, that just doesn't work. You need really a nice cohesive acreage. So that site was not a contender.
Okay. And my last question is, I don't know the difference, so please, somebody explain. The difference between a neighborhood school and a magnet school, because I heard somebody say magnet school.
Right.
What is
So
that?
when the time is right to do districting and districts are drawn, this school will have a set district, which is referred to as a neighborhood school, that would be based on the geography around the school, as opposed to a magnet or a choice school, which is, Guilford County Schools does that by a lottery system, and that's where, you can set in to try and go to this school that specializes in something. And you would, if you get a lottery selection, you would be able to go there regardless of where you live. So this school will not be a part of that choice program. It is a neighborhood school.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, a couple of questions. Since you're there, I'll start with you.
Okay.
In terms of, someone referenced the precedent in Denton, very similar to this area, and maybe Megan and both of you can weigh in. Legal recourse to file maybe an injunction. If it is approved tonight, is there any legal challenge that could slow this up in the process of beginning the process?
So the appeal legally from a zoning decision is to to the judicial system, and it would just appeal the zoning decision, which would be about the reasonableness and the inquiry that you all are, well familiar with, that you're supposed to make at a zoning case about, in tonight's case, institutional with the conditions as presented. So it would not be, the appeal from a decision tonight would not be about a school. It would be about the rezoning request and the reasonableness of your decision. It's what's called a de novo review, which means the court simply looks at the record tonight, looks at you guys' deliberation, the factors that you utilized, and decides if it was reasonable. It's not a trial where witnesses, where I would be able to talk or anyone else. It would be just a review on the record.
Okay, well, thank you. Dr. Oakley, there was, if you don't mind, there were several disagreements tonight about the enrollment of High Point City Schools. We say that you said they're overcrowded. Some folks say they're down based on the numbers. Can we get some data that can actually clear this up to see where we are in terms of overall enrollment in High Point City Schools, especially the Southwest area?
Sure, so I'll also just remind you that capacity is a point-in-time measure. So when things happen, like we became a one-to-one district in COVID, we got rid of the computer labs and added that classroom capacity, for example. So like it's not a permanent number, which I think is hard to understand but true. We have legislated K-3 class size requirements. We can't put more than 19 kids in a first grade class, even if we wanted to. We're not able to do that. So all of those are just two examples of things that impact capacity. And so the numbers, as we get closer to the date, of course, the numbers get tighter. And there has been fluctuation, again, that we're very consistent with our numbers across our country. The 2022-23 enrollment is 563. Projected to dip by 19 students and then recover back to 560 in 24-25 if things stay the same at Colfax. For Southwest Elementary, and Colfax was built in 1955, just for context. Southwest seems new, it was built in 1979. And so just when we're thinking about conditions of schools and where we want our kids to go to school. The 22-23 enrollment for Southwest is 812. Next year predicted 825, followed by 853. Southwest Middle School was built in 1992. It has 1,107 students. And then by 24-25 is supposed to be right on par. So with a 10 to 20 kid dip and then right back up. We currently have 6 mobile units that are occupied at Southwest Elementary, 10 at Southwest Middle, and 7 mobile units at Colfax. So I also just think it's important to know that every single year the school capacity is recalculated, and the capacity referenced in the study that was cited tonight was calculated in late 2017, and since then we've had COVID. We also had the class size legislation and capacity revisions that have come from external factors. So the numbers do fluctuate, but those are what they are, and that's the current state of those 3 schools. That doesn't take into account the Northwest growth that we're seeing.
Thank you. Is there someone from staff? I know we had numbers from when we did redistricting this year, and the Ward 6 North in North High Point grew by almost 8%, 1,400 people. And that was from, I think, 2010 to 2020. And so 8% growth, if even 25% of those are kids, we're looking at 600 and some odd kids. And enrollment for Katherine Johnson would be what, 900?
The built capacity, I think, is closer to 700 for this school. I can confirm that number. It was also in the initial zoning presentation, so we can refer back to it publicly. But yeah, I mean, also, and this is just true, that when new schools are built, it brings housing developments too. We've seen that happen in other areas of our county, and so we could infer from that data that we would have more kids. But I understand that the narrative, of course, it's out there, around the country about enrollment declining. I think it's just important to look at that in certain like, instead of making blanket statements, think about where that's true and what the data we have are telling us about where the businesses and residents are popping up. Just do that in context and not out of context.
And I think the reason we need to establish that is because we have to make a decision on the viability of this new school and the need of it and what need that it's serving. And it's not just the fixed point that we have to look at, but also the projected growth of this particular area. And so we just need to have a agreed upon fixed point of data that we can all agree on and then project from there. And so I want us to make sure that everyone who is in the Colfax area is also having the same data that Guilford County Schools has as well, and that we can agree on that in terms of where the schools actually are at capacity.
Sure, and we update that every spring based on the set of conditions. We use it to allot teachers for the following school year. So that's data that we have and we continue to monitor and update.
And final question, someone asked about emergency services. School resource officers, school nurse, in terms of response times from emergency services. What is the school plan? I know we just agreed that K through 8 would have a SRO. What about any medical school nurse, anything like that?
It would be staffed just like a middle school, right, with the additions laid on for the elementary school. So it would have the base structure of what's required in a middle school, because that's a little different when you add athletic fields. So it would be staffed following that same formula as our middle schools with those additional elementary supports. The number of students right now drives the number of school nurses. We're constantly advocating for school nurses. We'll continue to do that. But it would follow the middle school baseline with the layers on, like kindergarten teacher assistants. You don't have in a middle school, but you would have here in this program.
Anyone else with questions? I got a couple real quick. Dr. Oakley, you mentioned, I think somewhere along in your earlier comments about your desire, your wish to get these kids out of mobile units. Is that correct?
I think in the long term, after we saw the tornado and what happened to the mobile unit on the Hampton school site, it's not a picture that I can get out of my head.
And I don't disagree with that, although I sat in a couple of them during my day. But with that being said, at our existing schools where those mobile units are, they take up X amount of land, correct?
Sure, yeah, there's a different, depending on the size of the mobile.
So could we not turn some of that bond money into making those go away and make a permanent facility where they currently sit?
So I think we can't do that at every school that has mobiles, no. What we can do is look at a long-term plan to phase them out by getting the right number of seats in our higher concentrated areas where we're seeing that population is growing faster than the school size can accommodate, which is what we're doing here.
And I do believe a couple things. I do believe that, unless the bottom falls out of everything, which it might, we're going to continue to see demand for housing. I do believe that schools attract that. I also believe that demand's going to come with or without a school. And that's just the one question I had for you, so thank you for that on the mobile units. And then the final thing that I want to say is that, I love the kids. I love my teachers that I've had, the coaches that I've had, which I talked to a couple of them on Father's Day. So the schools in the High Point City school system were immensely important to me growing up. And I hope that they are to the kids going through now. But I believe Mr. Lamb spoke, is that correct? What's your name, sir? I was writing them down. No. The gentleman that mentioned eminent domain in a court fight. Okay, Michael. Okay, thank you, Michael. I just want this on the record. I'm not a fan of eminent domain, okay? The only reason that I brought it up is because, as our attorney mentioned, they're a function of government, we're a function of government. It is a tool in the quiver that could be considered especially when there is not an infinite amount of land being remade. So that was only to make that point. That was not a suggestion. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First is regarding, well, actually, my first one is to Mr. Shannon. There were questions about whether this property is located within our ETJ. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, the ETJ, known as the extraterritorial jurisdiction, that's a designation granted by the county to cities in areas where they believe there will be annexations. The last ETJ granted to the city of High Point was in the 1970s in the southeastern portion of the city. There is no ETJ designation in this area, which basically means it's first come, first serve, whether it's Greensboro, Kernersville, or High Point. To try and prevent that free-for-all, starting in the 1990s, High Point Planning Department reached out to the surrounding areas to set up annexation agreement boundaries. As this is how far we're going to annex, this is how far you're going to annex. If anything's in that area, we'll give you 30, or in Kernersville's situation, 60 days notice of a pending annexation. So for this area, there's no ETJ, but there is a long-standing agreement with Greensboro and Kernersville as far as each municipality's limits of annexation.
Thanks, Ms. Shannon. And my follow-up question will be to our attorney. There were questions brought up regarding whether this would constitute contract zoning, or if do you see any legal impediment to approval of this request based on anything regarding ETJ or?
Not that I've heard or seen in my review to date, no.
Okay. And in your mind, it does not meet the definition of spot zoning or contract zoning?
That's correct, it does not.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Councilman Hudson, you're recognized.
Thank you. To the citizens of Colfax that have come out tonight, I've heard you. Thank you for coming. I've read every email that's come across the desk. I've read every letter that you've written. I'll share with you, I grew up next door to an elementary school. My mother taught at that elementary school, and I walked through a cow pasture to get to that elementary school every day, back and forth. And that cow pasture is still there, and the elementary school is still there 50 years later. So I loved growing up next to an elementary school. We don't take this decision lightly. I appreciate your all's efforts. I've heard you. I'm going to make a motion to approve annexation 23-02 and map amendment 23-12 and include the consistency statement from planning and zoning.
Mr. Mayor, I'll second that.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. I think we have to vote on these separately. Isn't that not correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is it permissible for him to make a motion on both items as long as we vote on them separately?
So that we do this very clearly, perhaps just amend the motion and do it separately, just for any risk or confusion.
So I'm going to rule the motion out of order. That's it. I'm going to rule the motion out of order.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make a motion to approve annexation 23-02 and include the consistency statement from planning and zoning.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second by Councilman Jefferson. Is there any, we are voting on the annexation. Is there any discussion on the annexation?
And Mayor, if I will, just to be very clear, that we don't need the consistency statement for the annexation, but we will need that for the second motion.
You're going to rule me out of order again?
No, we're just going to disregard that. We're just going to disregard that. Okay, any discussion on the annexation motion?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to offer a couple comments. This is Councilman Jefferson. I want to say, first of all, how much I appreciate every single person who showed up this evening, whether you came on behalf of the applicant or you came on behalf of the community of the residents of Colfax. I think that folks choosing to participate civically is so important, and that's why having a democracy that's for the people, by the people, and it's so special. So I don't want to take that for granted and tell you how much I appreciate the work and time that's gone into the presentation. One of the items that I think has come up a number of times in regards to the issue with the schools in High Point, and whether we have an overcrowding issue or whether we have a redistricting issue. I can tell you, as a graduate of Andrews High School, as someone who went through it at the years in which it saw a declining student population, and as someone who taught at Andrews High School for several years after that, after I came back from college, that I felt the pressures of what that looked like. However, despite the feelings I had as a student and teacher at the time, thinking that it was just a redistricting issue, what I began to learn, especially now as a public servant, that I think it goes beyond that. To be honest, we live in a country that prides itself on people being able to choose. And we live in a city where we have so many concentrated areas of poverty that within those neighborhoods where some of these schools reside, my alma mater in Ward 1, I'll be the first to tell you, as one of those concentrated areas of poverty, that's some of the issue we run into. You talk about where Andrews began to see that declining population, we can talk about redistricting, and this isn't, I'm just being honest, it was where folks decided to move from those areas and move to North High Point. And they moved there because those were some of the newer homes and newer developments happening. And we see that trend that's going to continue to happen. So to your point, Councilman Moore, that housing development in the Colfax area is going to happen regardless. I think that where the school folks have to make the decision is, where does the school go that's most appropriate for where that population growth is going? I think that if we're wanting to see our schools in High Point begin to receive some of that enrollment the way that it needs to, I think this is a conversation beyond redistricting. I think we have to continue to do the good governance work we've been doing to invest in those areas of town such that we can see the collective economic opportunity and access of those residents raise up. And then I think we'll begin to see some things change in terms of those schools there. Take it from someone who went there literally and graduated 13 years ago and taught there just 5 or 6 years ago. And so I want to note that because I know that's going to keep coming around and keep coming back around. I think the other thing we don't want to take for granted is that North Carolina saw the third highest growth in population rates over the past several years compared to all the states in the union. We were behind Texas and Florida, and so no other state besides Texas, Florida, and North Carolina saw greater population growth, and I don't foresee that changing. I think that the other thing I want to note is this, we're noting that there's no legal impediments. We're also noting that, quite frankly, what we're hearing in terms of traffic's not quite what we're hearing from some of the comments. I appreciated that simulation. I meant to ask you that if you assume folks show up to elementary school 30 minutes before for drop-off, I drop my kids off every day. Folks don't do that. We all get there right at the time, and then we keep it pushing. And if you thought that line was bad, you should see every single other line, but they move way faster. I think that a lot of the things that I'm hearing here are that there are none of the traditional reasons or even the legal reasons or the ethical reasons that we normally have to deny these kinds of requests. And because I'm just not seeing it, I think, to your point, and it was a good one, it is a personal issue. And I don't belittle the personal issue. I just question whether we have the legal right to deny something like this that's in the community use and community good based on the personal issue of whether you want your neighborhood to still look exactly the way it is. I think every single month we get faced with cases where we're having to choose if we're going to change the way someone's neighborhood looks. And it's a very tough decision because no one wants their neighborhood to look different. I don't think any person ever wants their neighborhood to look different. And it's just a point that's so important to me to kind of note that, because I do think we're doing good work here having these kinds of discussions and conversations. Just want to highlight some points that I think are a little contrary to some things we've been hearing here lately.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilman Holmes.
Thank you all for coming out. This is a very emotionally charged issue, but I want to share with you guys my experience in terms of making the decision and the choice of where your kids go to school. My wife and I, when we had our first child, we lived in the county of Guilford County. We lived out off of High Cone Road. and, find schools, but, our jobs and the things that we did were in the city of Greensboro and the city of High Point. And so when we were looking to move, we were looking to where we wanted to settle our family and grow our family. We looked at the Southwest School, and they were highly recommended by family and friends. It was a growing neighborhood, very safe neighborhood, walkable sidewalks, and my kids can make an easy, 15-minute walk right up to the schools. And they've gone through Southwest Elementary to Southwest Middle, Southwest High, and then on to college. And I think as I look at this district with the surrounding economic development coming around it, with Boom Supersonic, with the industrial corridor right off of Sandy Ridge Road, the housing that's going to follow. We just approved, nearly 600 units of new housing here, and those are going to be filled with families and kids, and those kids have to go to school somewhere. And so it will be at Southwest and the adjacent areas. And so we have to make a decision on the livability of you all as residents of Colfax, but also the future of the population as it continues to grow. And everyone here acknowledges that this population growth is going to continue right alongside the economic growth of this city. So it is a very difficult decision for us to make, but it's one that we can't put off anymore. And, I think we thank you for your voice, and then I will yield back.
Anyone else like to speak on the motion?
Mr. Mayor, I would.
Jones.
I would say, year 6 of doing this, I would say our default answer in the lack of any opposition is yes on an application, whether it's rezoning, annexation, or whatever. If there's no reason to deny, we're really just asked, should we stand in the way of this application or not? And we've got those 5 things we can use to deny these cases, and our hands are kind of tied to those things. Public safety, property valuations, traffic, non-conforming use, all those different things. And I think there's a lot of statements I've heard from the 2 neighborhood meetings, the planning and zoning meetings, phone calls, emails. I've probably got somewhere in 20 hours around about this. I met with Dr. Oakley to ask some questions about that. I had a meeting with CBRE to verify the process and how long this took and how long this would set us back if we found reasons to deny this. And every one of them, I mean, like Wesley said, my grandpa was a pastor up in the cornfields of Indiana, and the school and his church was right there in the middle of all these farms. You put schools in churches so you can feed them and preach to them, right? That's why they're usually in those areas. So I don't see non-conforming use. And to be clear, when I go to these meetings, I'm not looking for a reason to approve it. Like our default answer is to approve. Those 20 hours were spent at the request of these people who were against this, trying to find not just a reason, but a legal reason that we can actually, as a council, use. And so I said, okay, what about traffic? There's a lot of concerns about traffic. I think they're all valid and they're all accurate. I think as it stands, I drive there once every week, if not every other week, to the VA out in Kernersville, where I go and take some of our veterans there through the Hero Center. I know that area really well. They're right. There's some bad little turns in there. If nothing is done, that is a bad area. However, I don't think anything's going to be done to make that traffic any better unless a project like this comes along and provides funding and some plans to mitigate that traffic. And believe it, and as you guys, I asked Madam Attorney earlier today, are we really in a position that we can legally consider traffic if our TIA, our experts at the applicant's expense, have done a TIA, who are we to use traffic opinions versus a TIA? I don't think that's a valid. And so all the reasons that I've been searching for to try to find a reason to say no on this, because I know so many people want us to find a reason to say no. To be honest, I'm striking out. That's all.
Anyone else like to be heard?
I want to make sure I was
heard a couple things right before we vote. I asked early in the meeting, if this zoning is approved, it comes in as industrial, right, Mr. Shannon? Institutional. Correct, okay. I meant institutional, thank you, that's what I wrote. And this is not a choice school, correct, Amanda? Correct. Okay, and there were 14 or so more places considered, correct?
On the initial list, yes.
Okay, and those weren't provided to council, correct?
Or the community.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anyone else with any comments? Okay, I'm going to ask for a vote by a show of hands. All those in favor of approval of the annexation motion, please raise your hand. Okay. All those against? It appears that the vote is passed by a vote of 7-2, and floor is open.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve zoning map amendment 23-12 and include the consistency statement from planning and zoning.
So I'll second it.
Okay. There's a motion made by Councilman Hudson, seconded by Councilman Jefferson for approval of the zoning matter and adopting the consistency and reasonableness statement of the Planning and Zoning Board. Is there any discussion on the zoning case?
I'll state one more thing, is that I could not find any reasons to find no on the annexation. I do think there are some challenges with the actual rezoning. I know they're two separate issues, but they need to be considered separately.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Again, by a show of hands, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. All those opposed? Okay. The zoning matter has passed by a vote of 6-3. Okay. Next on the agenda is our general business items. The first is the consideration of an appointment to the Citizens Advisory Council. If you're leaving, please do so quietly. Council is requested to approve the recommendation of Michael Holmes to appoint Victor Vincent to the Citizens Advisory Council. Councilman Holmes, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am very pleased to announce Victor Vincent as my appointee to the Citizens Advisory Council. Mr. Vincent has a long history of working with those in the community that have been part of the justice system and working to reintegrate them into society with new jobs and new opportunities. So I think he has a unique perspective that he could bring to the CAC, and I'm very pleased to make a motion to accept Victor Vincent's appointment to the CAC.
Second.
There's a motion and a second for the appointment, for this appointment. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
And Mr. Mayor, he's very patiently waited throughout this entire time. So I don't know what the protocol is, but if he would, like to say something, I don't know if that's okay.
No, I've been busy tonight. You got 3 minutes.
Yeah, you already earned extra points.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have some minutes that need to be approved. Motion to approve.
Second.
The motion and a second to approve the minutes listed. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Before we adjourn, is there anyone who would like to make any announcements or?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. All of you should have found at your seats tonight some wonderful new apparel that is adorned with our new mark, our new logo, the city logo that we worked so hard on for the last few months. Oh, a bag, swag, whatever you want to call it. But it is, but more stuff is on the way. I cannot say enough about the staff, about staff and the hard work that they put in to get here. So far, everybody that has been part of this This mark has been extremely well received, and I think it's going to be an incredible opportunity for us to take the city in a new, more creative, inclusive direction. So more stuff to come, and we look forward to activation events that are coming in August. And so I think it's going to be a beautiful thing for the city.
Okay.
There continues to be activity right regularly that's attracting people to the Stock and Grain area in the downtown social district. Please continue to share that, to participate in it, and to keep High Point energized and moving forward.
And you might get to stay out past 10:30.
Anyone else with anything to announce? Okay. I want to take an opportunity to thank everybody for wishing me a happy birthday a couple days ago. That was nice. Even though I was spending all my time carrying boxes that day. But also, just to remind everybody too, that before we meet again, we will celebrate Independence Day, and hopefully we'll all get to go somewhere nice and celebrate that, but remember what it means. And also like to say that I believe yesterday was our first official city Juneteenth holiday. Didn't we just appoint it? Last year was? Okay, well, I missed the first year. I'm sorry. But I did enjoy watching some of the commemorations of that day yesterday as well. So with that being said, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? There's a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Is there anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes, and we are now adjourned.
Mike, you and Wesley.
Thanks for your help, Ryan.